we get started, one item of business is make sure your mics are turned on and you're close enough to them to be able to hear yourself and the speakers here, or the folks online won't be able to hear you. So this item is the HCD comment letter. You have the staff report, which is very, very brief, but there are several attachments. The first attachment is a matrix of the comments in the letter from HCD line by line. The second attachment is the actual letter that the town received from HCD. And attachment number 3 is the statutory authority matrix for all of HCD's comments specifically, and then just a reference of where that is within the statute. Our intent is not to go through attachment 3 unless there are specific questions, but attachment 1 is paragraph by paragraph of the letter itself. And in that, if there are questions with respect to the statutory information, staff can address that. But the attachment 1 provides a matrix of specific HCD comments, staff's assessment of whether that comment will require a decision or direction from the council, the level of difficulty in preparing that town response, and a recommended action. The recommended action is just based on staff's expertise and analysis of what's required or directed from HCD and how the town could adapt that locally to comply. Of course, at the end of the day, the city council is the policy board and staff takes direction from the council and we move on next steps based on that. In that attachment, there's about 69 lines and some of them have yellow highlights that identify where there's council action required. Of those 69 lines, 21 of them or 22 of them have council direction request. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Costa-Sanders, Barbara Couch, and Diane Elrod to begin going through attachment 1. And again, if you have questions on the statutory provision that's referenced in that comment, they can address that as well.
So just a request, can we go through the letter? I can't really read, the type is so small on this attachment 1. It's hard to read it. But I understand they all track the paragraph in the letter.
I think staff will reference line 1 within the attachment or paragraph 1 or whatever that is with the letter. But it'll be the same thing and they'll articulate it in the letter.
Okay. Because I know council members have lots of questions about different things.
Great. I'm Diane Elrod. For people who don't know me, I'm a consultant assisting with the.
On? Oh, now it's on. I'm Dinah Elrod. I'm a consultant assisting with the responses to the HED letter. I'm happy to go through each one of these individually so you understand what they mean and what we recommend the response should be or what is required in the response. With that, I'll go ahead and just dig right in. The first one, it basically asks for how did the objectives and programs of the prior element affect, if it did, the new housing element, the one that is being reviewed now. Basically, this is a narrative change and or elaboration, if you will. You stop me if you want me to stop on any one of these, but I'm going to give you time to go through them.
Is this in, I don't know where we are in the letter.
This is the very first item, A letter. It's absolute, this, yes, review and revise.
I have a question on the 2-page introductory letter.
Yes.
That they sent covering the appendix. In paragraph 3, it says throughout the housing.
Mr. Mayor, you need to turn your microphone on.
Yeah, okay. In paragraph 3, it says throughout the second sentence says throughout the housing element process, the town should continue to engage the community, including organizations that represent lower income and special needs households. And I'm just wondering which those organizations are.
There are some that operate throughout the county. They include various legal aid type groups. HEART, which is an agency that provides services to lower income households and so forth. These are the kinds of groups they'd be listed in the housing element as agencies that represent groups that are that may not necessarily show up to meetings, but that do live in the community.
So does the term community not refer to Atherton?
It does refer to Atherton, yes.
And then what are the organizations that are active in
They're-
Atherton?
They're primarily countywide organizations paid for typically through CDBG funds and so forth at the county level, for example, fair housing groups.
Yeah, so although there's no specific organizations that are housed in Atherton, through the 21 Elements group, we did reach out to the broader community and we attended those countywide meetings. And so I think we just need to expand on that. This is really awkward hearing yourself.
I feel very loud.
But we'll expand that conversation in the beginning because we did do that early on in the process as a countywide effort.
Okay, and so do we have a list of who those organizations are?
We do.
Yes.
Yes. So are you,
If I could expound on that. So some of those programs have been active here in placing people in some homes. So I guess you have that data and you will be incorporating that, as examples.
we already have included some of that information that's required in the needs assessment. That was a very lengthy document, like 75 pages or so. We will probably need to reach out to those groups and ask for further assistance with perhaps data that we didn't have at the time that this was drafted.
Plus, there's been, I don't know if in that request that we sent out for ADUs and, are you renting or things like that? There are people who are home sharing or room sharing with people in the community. There are not many, but there are some. And I don't know if the city actually has knowledge of those or not.
I would defer to the town staff on that.
Well, we do have some data from HIP housing that we contract with, but it's very limited.
Because I could give you names of some people. I've talked to George about some of those people and, it'd be good if we could at least, list those as well because they do count in their low income sharing. So.
We just want to make sure we list them in the aggregate, not their addresses and names and things like that, but
No, but
Data.
you know the names and you can share that, but
Right.
yeah, I just want to make sure it's covered.
Cool.
Because that, enhances our position.
right.
Okay. Yes.
So if I could just verify and really make really clear, because in my review, I took their letter that they sent us with their appendix to the town of Atherton. And what you've done is you've taken each paragraph pretty much,
Yes.
and you've itemized it on this grid and matrix.
Yes.
So if someone is having a hard time reading the grid matrix, we could just read from the letter.
Correct. They're in order of the letter. They were not taken in any other order. So it's paragraph by paragraph in the letter.
And unfortunately, they didn't number each item of their letter, so that's a
Right.
little hard to track there.
Right.
Yeah.
Where the,
So
where the attachment one says line number, does that really mean paragraph? number?
No, it means that's the item number of this particular spreadsheet, so that if somebody wants to come back and say, I'd like to talk about the item number 7.
mhm.
So
But-
the second column has letters like A, B.1. Those are that's from the HCD letter. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
a thorough program by program, that's the
Right.
first one, 1A.
Yeah, that's.
Okay, and then it goes down from there.
Yeah, so we didn't
In
copy that
fact,
intro statement that says
okay.
government code section 65588
So I
requires.
think
That's
that's
not
gonna
in
help
there.
him.
So it's a little hard to do paragraph by
No, I
paragraph,
thought
but
that
it's
the
there.
paragraph item was very good. I appreciate you doing that.
Would it help to put it on the screen so we
I
can
know.
see it and kind of zoom in on it?
And I don't,
I blew mine up, so I'm good. I mean, I asked George. I get a big one
I'll zoom in and show you.
on the screen. Yeah, that would help, I think.
So before we go any further, we got to get through these 21 yellow items.
Essentially, yes.
I-
Those are the key ones, but they've responded to other ones that we might want to actually go through.
Do we really care how they're going to respond? Because if you're going to beat up every one of those other boxes, we'll be here until tomorrow sometime.
Well, there's some beige ones that maybe we should look at. Right. Yeah, but there are some beige ones that, you know, a medium that we should probably take a peek at, even though they didn't ask for our input. In my mind.
Are there any sort of general questions that we can answer before we start going through each item? Okay, so let me go back and just start at the very beginning. Number one, the letter, the HCD letter notes it as letter A. And it's asked for a thorough program by program review is necessary to evaluate the town's performance in addressing housing goals. We did include a review and revise of the prior element, but they're asking now for more detail of how the objectives in the new element that we're working on, we're incorporating changes that we've found from the evaluation of the old housing element. This doesn't really, this is more of a revise the narrative kind of discussion and doesn't necessarily require, we didn't feel, obviously we're open to anything, doesn't not feel it needs council decision-making. It's primarily the ones that we felt have council decision-making interests were ones that were major policy changes, changes to the inventory of units, et cetera, et cetera. Line number 2, this is again with the review and revise. The element must analyze the effectiveness of the goals in addressing basically the needs of special needs populations. For example, seniors, persons with disabilities, et cetera. This particular item, every jurisdiction that I know of has received this comment. This also, we did not feel was required council input, and it's basically to the extent we have data to know whether or not programs positively impacted special needs households, we'll provide that information, and if not, we'll so note if we don't have that information.
Okay, so go ahead.
I just will challenge you that in your statement that you are going to review and revise the narrative, do you feel confident that you have enough proof, examples, data to give HCD in answering the revision and revised narrative that will satisfy as it pertains to Atherton?
Yes. And the reason is this is a question that every jurisdiction has received, or comment that every jurisdiction has received. And I've discussed with several of my other clients, specifically with HCD, what is it that you're looking for? And they would just like to know, do you have information about special needs populations? If we don't, we have to say we do not have special information about special needs populations.
And so you're going to say yes, and here's their information.
Correct.
Here's our data.
Correct.
Here's the proof.
Yeah.
Okay.
We
I'm just-
revised the actual review and revise of the prior element. We'll do a red line saying this item has, we know that this served X number of people, and we don't know what their income group was, or we do, or we have whatever information that we do have, we'll include in that.
Okay. Okay. So that's,
So, you're just taking the data off the census information, is that correct? In many
No, it would be
cases?
program, this is information about specific programs that the town had implemented with the last housing element. And to the extent the town kept records of who was served in those programs, we'll provide that information.
Okay, but in the recent survey, in the recent census, you know, some people put down, hey, I'm, you know, handicapped or not handicapped, it's got information, you know, their ethnic group as far as, and, you know, ages, et cetera, et cetera. So I assume that in some of those questions that we have here, we're going back to that too. So the county may have some data, but if the census data has better data, then we should probably take that. Or
This is actual people served by the programs the town implemented. It's not generally how many people there are. We already know that in the needs analysis. This is specific to the programs from the last housing element that the town implemented and who was served by those in Atherton, who was served by those programs. We may be able to find that data for certain things, for example, fair housing from service providers. If we don't have the information, we simply say we don't have the information.
Fine.
I have one quick question on the third attachment relative to item number 2. It says affirmatively further fair housing in accordance with chapter 15, but it's talking about all economic segments of the community. Is the community Atherton?
Yes,
But we only have kind of one economic segment.
you actually have 140 lower income households living in Atherton, more than 140 lower income households, according to the data provided.
I have personally served Meals on Wheels to these people who are like housebound bound. Yeah.
So the third one begins a discussion in detail about the affirmatively furthering fair housing. This is item D.1. This fair housing enforcement capacity, this is specifically required of almost every jurisdiction's letter that I've seen. It's basically conferring with the town's attorney that there haven't been any lawsuits lodged against the town based on fair housing concerns and or any other kinds of enforcement actions. And it's a declarative positive statement that the town is complying with fair housing laws. So that's a root policy, by the way, which is listed in the far column on recommended action. They were the ones that provided the most detailed information on affirmatively furthering fair housing for every jurisdiction in 21 elements, as well as others.
And did we not state that in the initial filing, or is this?
They've
just
never asked.
boilerplate?
This is boilerplate. They've never asked us to definitively state we are complying with fair housing laws
And that we don't have
and that we don't have, yeah,
lawsuits.
it didn't, I'm not kidding you. Every jurisdiction has this in the letter.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Number 4, local data and knowledge. This is really trying to understand how did Atherton develop over time? And it should include data local data to the extent that it exists about the historical development of Atherton. We can look at county and town planning documents to sort of just be able to describe in narrative form. How did the town grow? Why is the town perhaps different than other jurisdictions around it, et cetera? Again, this one we decided what the level of difficulty was a medium because it requires more research than we've done to date. And root policy is also going to be helping us with that. Historical data is probably the most useful to show maybe development of the town over time. But that takes a little bit more of a higher level of effort.
And we do have resources through the Heritage Association to get to some of that records if we need it.
So is anybody from Root Policy here?
Wrong stuff.
No, they're in
Not you.
Denver. No,
Oh, so they just work remotely.
yes,
Not
pay
at
them?
our fingertips.
the 21 elements
I
paid
wouldn't
them.
know.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got a lot of historic
Good.
data. Yeah.
And is it common for them to ask every community for their entire history of exclusionary zoning?
Yes, it is. It's one of the main thrusts of the AFFH legislation.
Okay,
Number 5 is integration and segregation. There's much data in the housing element that was provided by UC Merced in conjunction with ABAG regarding the analysis of integration and segregation. It's basically, this one asks for more detail on the concentrations of familial status, both locally and regionally. This has to do with single heads of households, understanding the composition of households in Atherton compared to the area around it to understand differences. And then the element must describe what contributes to the high incomes geographically within the town and provide a regional analysis. Again, this is a compare and contrast effort between the town and the surrounding jurisdictions. And route policy is also helping with that, with the data.
I have a question. So I thought this was a reasonable request. I mean, it makes sense to me. I don't know how geographically designated they're asking us to be, but it makes sense to me that the biggest contributor to the fact that there are high incomes in Atherton is the cost of property.
It's the exclusionary zoning.
Yeah.
Pardon?
It's the zoning that we have minimum 1 acre lots. That's the contributing factor.
Yeah.
We don't have 5,000 square foot lots allowed throughout the house,
Yeah.
the community. So we exclude that.
Next one, number 6 is racial and ethnic areas of concentration of poverty. These are called recaps, or in those areas of affluence. Now, we already provided information, or the town did, I should say, not we, because I wasn't there. We've already provided information on recap, the recap areas, that relationship. Basically, there are a few of these concentrations of poverty areas in San Mateo County. They do exist, but they are few and far between. The data on racial and ethnic areas of concentrations of affluence was a data point that was not available when you submitted your housing element for the first review to the state. So every jurisdiction has got in the Bay Area has gotten this comment. So route policy will be helping us talk about the relationship between the town, its RCAA areas, and other RCAA areas around it, whether there is a distinction and how big of a distinction there is between the two. The next one, number 7 is.
Wait, I have a question though.
Sure.
I don't understand how that's determined. So neighborhood, they're saying you need to look at it neighborhood to neighborhood. So is that saying we have to do an evaluation of Lloyden Park versus Lindenwood versus the area around the town center versus?
It's Atherton versus the communities around it.
So it's not neighborhood to neighborhood.
No,
It's town or city to city.
Typically speaking, if you're a town like Atherton, and there are several that are basically all RCAAs, they don't have any areas, concentrations of poverty. Those are the ones that are required to look at the areas around it to understand the distinctions between the two, whether there are relationships that can be drawn or not. This is,
What's
again,
RCAA?
racial and ethnic concentrations of affluence. If one area is predominantly, let's say predominantly white or Asian versus another area that has a lot of poverty that is African-American and Hispanic, they want to understand where those areas are in relationship to Atherton. This is true of every jurisdiction.
I just want to make a quick comment. If we go back to Faxon Dean Atherton, and when he came and bought the 280 acres here, and he got his good buddy to come out, forget his name, anyway, because there's landed estates here just south of San Francisco with a nice climate, and there's schools. And that was kind of the very beginning of Atherton. I mean, that's our historical heritage. And it was these large estates that rich San Francisco people came down and built summer homes, and then it just kind of built up that way. And then the large acre lots, or whatever it was more than acre lots then. And that's just how it came down. I don't know. I hope you.
But
No,
this is
that's-
asking for a comparison over time, neighborhood to neighborhood. I don't think that has anything to do with,
I'm going back to what we were talking
but
about.
that's
the history.
150 years ago.
No, in here, they were talking about what's the history of exclusionary zoning? I mean, how
Well,
did we get here? And that's
that-
kind of how we got
I'm
here.
sure there's been exclusionary zoning in Atherton. I'm sure there has been everywhere in California, frankly. I don't know the history. It hasn't been here since I've been here, but I'm sure we can obtain that information in some manner, but that doesn't address the neighborhood to neighborhood. I don't really get it.
The reason
This
that
is comparing Lloyden Park to
Oh.
Lindenwood.
in a jurisdiction that has, let's say, areas of affluence and areas of poverty, then you would understand and just analyze the relationship between the two neighborhoods. The entirety of Atherton is this RCAA. There are no concentrations of poverty or ethnic concentrations of poverty. Therefore, because the entirety of the town is an RCAA, we have to go outside and understand the relationship of the town with the jurisdictions around it. That's what the analysis calls for. And this is also another, all these AFFH ones are going to be assisted. Root policy is working on developing the data that we need to. They're going to develop the data and then we're going to describe it. That's essentially what we have to do. Going to go on to the next one. Number 8, disproportionate housing needs, including displacement risk. We had a lot of information again in the AFFH about disproportionate housing needs. Households that are tend to have lower incomes by either race or other defining factor, especially households that are protected classes. I don't off the top of my head know what the disproportionate housing needs are in your community, but I know in others that single female heads of household have disproportionately poor housing outcomes, and some of the programs that jurisdiction put in place are intended to address those specific types of households. So we have to do more detail on the analysis, local and regional discussions of cost burden by tenure. Well, that cost burden is people who pay too much for housing. What's the difference between, is Atherton demonstrably different than other jurisdictions immediately around it? This requires a little heavier lift of discussion. So that's why we put it as a medium, and root policy is also helping us with this one.
Wait, are you 7 or 8? 7.
8. Oh,
We
I'm
skipped
sorry.
7.
I did skip 7. You're right. I just talked about 8. I go back to
Well,
7 now.
I'm fine to go through 8 if you want to, but we should go back to 7 before.
I will definitely go through. Sorry about that. I crossed it off without actually talking about it. Disparities in access to opportunity. There are differences in educational scores, health outcomes, and so forth that are analyzed as part of the AFFH. And according to the data provided, this again was provided in the AFFH document. It should discuss what contributes to the lower education score in the town west of El Camino Real. This is one that we're going to talk to root policy about. We have to understand that people who have perhaps lower educational scores may not have access to the same schools, or locationally don't have access to opportunities that other people do. All of these types of things feed into the discussion of your housing inventory, and whether the location of future housing addresses and it does not exacerbate poor, let's say poor educational scores, may improve things, may distribute households of different incomes throughout the community, so there are no concentrations of them. I see a hand raised.
Mayor.
So,
Yeah, sorry.
yeah, so different educational scores are affected by a number of things. One is, what's going on in the household. If the household has ways, to educate the child at home, or enhance their education, or provide tutoring or stuff like that. That's one thing. It's not just access to, one school versus another school. And I would hope that, we're not just going to go with the root things as, oh, well, this community near us has low scores. It just means that, we can pay better teachers and they want to flock to this area. And that's what the problem is. That, a lot of these things you can do a black and white thing if you want, but that's not telling the story. That's not what, maybe it's not what they want to hear, but that's what they should hear, because that's the facts.
what this is asking for, these analyses are asking for, explain what's being seen, if there are disparities. If you can describe why there are disparate impacts on certain households, that would be useful to know. And if there are ways that the town could address it, that's also, obviously not everything can be fixed. And I don't think that that's the effort. I think the primary effort is to shed light on what these issues are. And to the extent that the town or any town or city can address it, then that would be a great program to add something that would help. Generally speaking, though, this is a housing element, not an education element, and I know that. However, this is what the law requires us to talk about. So we're going to analyze it, talk about it, and see if we can, if there's anything that maybe we never realized, something that there is something that we could do, maybe not pertaining to educational scores, but for example, substandard housing, or people who are paying too much money for their housing, that maybe we can target these households to get rent assistance of some kind, that kind of thing.
Well, make sure you talk about our library, the educational opportunities that are there for free.
It's there's a lot of data in the analysis already of what the resources are available in the community.
Diana?
Yes.
Just for clarity on that one, it mentions discuss what contributes to the lower education score in the town west of El Camino.
Mhm.
So is this isn't, we're comparing ourselves to outside the
Right.
town. It's in the town. Somewhere there's data that says on the west side of El
Yes.
Camino, there's a lower educational there's education disparity that we
disparities.
need to identify and address. And stuff.
Say, what is that? Let's talk about it. Where did it come
West
from?
of El Camino.
Do we know
That's
where that
all
comes
the
from?
I don't
big
know
schools
exactly.
are. And
Well, only 7% of the Atherton children go to the schools around here,
So
go to the public schools.
Well, but
Well,
west
yeah.
of El Camino, actually, I think the school system that's west of El Camino is Los Lomitas. It just got the highest score in the state for elementary schools.
Right.
So I don't know what they're
But we would-
referring to.
Well, we don't have to.
Aliante
Selby Lane
Selby-
School.
Selby
Yes,
Lane.
thank you.
is, yeah,
Selby Lane School.
it's renamed.
But it's in data somewhere. We just have to address it.
Right, exactly.
Well,
See,
there is-
Remember, I am just explaining. I did not
Sure.
write this.
Sure,
But,
sure,
you know,
I'm trying to
Sacred
help
Heart,
you.
That's probably right. It probably is Selby Lane School.
Shall we move on to the next one that I skipped to, the disproportionate housing needs? This one is the one that there are certain households, for example, I mentioned in a jurisdiction, single female heads of household have a more difficult time with, for example, overpayment for housing. They pay too much for housing, disproportionate to other households. In another, in the same actually city, Hispanic households have a much higher rate of rehabilitation or substandard housing. So your programs, ideally, the ones that address them will target assistance to those kinds of households. So this one requires us to talk about more about, again, disproportionate housing needs, and talk about it and provide a deeper analysis on displacement risk. What is the risk of, for example, the 140 households in Atherton that are lower income? What are the potential displacement risks for those households? This one is also a little bit more involved, just because of looking at a broader array of data for us to make some intelligent conclusions from that.
Would you also be commenting on, for example, the use of HIP housing and many of the county-based items that are placing people in homes and doing home share and things like that, right?
Exactly. But we have to start with what's the problem and then how does it get fixed? Or how do we address it? Or can we address it? There are certain things that can't be addressed, but to shed light on all these things.
So
I
they're
have a
also
question.
talking about the displacement due to earthquakes and flood disasters.
Mhm.
So there are areas in Atherton that are more susceptible to that kind of
Right.
displacement.
And so we have to look at a map and say, if there are lower income households in that area or people who receive housing choice vouchers, also known as Section 8, are they at risk of displacement because of these different
I'm
environmental issues?
pretty sure that.
Again, we look at the data, we understand it, we bring it to light. Then you can make decisions on whether it's not something that's I mean, not everything can be a priority for the town or any city to undertake. But to know about it is really bringing, I think the thrust of the AFFH is to understand what can you do and what are the areas that you can have the greatest impact.
I have a question. What does it mean? The analysis should include both local and regional discussion of cost burden by tenure.
That cost burden is people who pay too much for housing, whether their tenure is whether they're renters or owners. You do have renters in,
So tenure is the difference between renting and owning.
correct?
Okay.
I think we all pay too much for housing.
The next one is your first one that we highlighted as needing, eventually will need council decision-making. This one is really understanding your site's inventory with the lens of fair housing. The element includes a summary of fair housing related to the site's inventory. It has to identify how the sites contribute to or mitigate fair housing issues. I think that this is one where we have to really understand. They go on to say this analysis should specifically address whether the ADU strategy to accommodate lower income households contributes to continued exclusion and disparities in access to opportunity. This one really requires us to understand where are we proposing, we can look at where ADUs have traditionally gone. Are they currently going locationally? Understand whether those areas are going to be impacting negatively, like if there's a concentration of lower income households in a certain area, do we want lower income ADUs to go in that area? I think it's also going to require us to talk more, which we'll talk more about the comment about multifamily zones within Atherton. I think this is really going to address that. They're going to want to understand if the town continues with a primary ADU program, they're going to probably push back and want to know how not having a multifamily zone improves housing for people who are lower income. And this is the reason this was posted as yellow is in part because it's going to be ultimately a policy decision that you make. And it may require you to adjust your inventory depending upon how some of the comments about the ADU program, which we'll talk about later in this, shake out.
I was going to ask, we spoke with the people at MA and they said that their teachers and their staff would love to be placed in our ADUs. If we create a program, would that be a policy that would be addressed under this? Because it's addressing especially if we not just faculty, but we went to employees at the schools, they would be considered lower income. They'd fit in that category. So would that be the kind of thing that would be here?
A caveat to that, and Barb, I would ask Barb to weigh in on the idea of let's say housing, like ADUs for worker housing for schools. I will tell you that traditionally, and this is changing somewhat, that having a local preference for housing for lower income households does oftentimes come up against fair housing rules, because Atherton is largely a Caucasian white community, and the market in which it is located, which is by most, the way they define it is the county, your demographics do not align with the county. So if the workers in various locations correspond roughly to the demographics of the county, I think one can make a positive argument that way, that you're, especially if you affirmatively market to those households that are lower income and people of color. I think that that may work. But I know, Barb, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to say about that issue.
Well, Atherton, as I understand it, doesn't have any commercial areas, correct? So your workers are basically education workers and probably household help.
Service workers.
So I think that there's actually two issues. One is what Diana mentioned about whether the workers in the city kind of mirror the demographics of the market area, which is somewhat difficult to determine. There's another specific prohibition in the planning and zoning law against discrimination based on source of income or on occupation. So for instance, a preference for teachers working, in certain schools would probably violate both of those. A number of cities have general work preferences, preferences for people who work in the city. Those aren't discriminatory on their face. The issue would be whether, what the demographics are of those people who work in the town, which might be difficult to determine because they're so few and limited.
I'm sorry, did you say we could not have a program for teachers?
Pardon?
Are you saying we could not have a program that within our ADU, a special program targeting schools and teachers, that would not be allowed?
There's a specific prohibition in the planning and zoning law against discrimination based on source of income or legal occupation. We've run into that actually in trying to give preferences, say, to police and fire.
Yeah.
Yeah, for the same. A school district can build its own housing and give preference to the teachers.
Okay.
And there's also a provision that they can partner with the town and, give preference to teachers and to public employees. But for an ADU, which isn't built on school district property and is private, the town as a planning policy can't have that preference, if that makes sense.
Could a private school have it and open it up to public school employees?
Yeah, there's provisions for teacher housing. I haven't looked at it lately in terms of how it applies to private schools as opposed to public schools. There was just a bill passed that basically says housing on public school property, I think starting in 2024, will be exempt from, is considered basically exempt from local zoning. But your schools, as I understand that, are private, correct?
Both. Both.
You have some public.
Free
So
press.
the public schools have more, more ability to do it. And I haven't looked at all the teacher housing bills to see, we can do that, to see how they apply to private schools.
Okay.
And what about the grants that are available for rent for teachers, for example, that are state provided? Can we take advantage of that as part of our ADU program?
I don't know who provides those grants to teachers in particular. Most of what I've heard about is teacher housing being built. George, it looks like you want to.
You might be referring to the California Teachers Act fund.
Yes.
But that's not a
Yes.
grant. That's a funding mechanism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Elizabeth?
So Barbara, in her question and answer with Diana, kind of explained what I was going to clarify about if we build on private school property, a multifamily unit building complex that is specifically targeted for faculty and students and workers for service workers for that community. Because what I had heard you say, that we couldn't specify that, carve out that teachers, would be.
Yeah, but it's also source of income. So you can't, so
The source of
the
income.
teacher-
You mean
yeah.
that level of income,
the source of income, you
Um,
can't say that
teachers.
that people who are employed by a district or employed by a school.
If it's on
That's
school
their source of-
property.
Yes, so that with the school let's see, there are some very general employee housing provisions
Mhm.
that are old, and if you read them, they seem to be directed toward farm workers.
Mm.
But so someone could attempt to rely on those kind of old employee housing provisions. Then there's specific teacher housing, or actually school district housing provisions. And those actually specify that either staff or teachers can get those preferences. But that's again for housing that's actually built by the schools for their staff and for their for all of their staff members.
As you know, one of our thoughts is to have a multi-unit building built on a school property, private school
Right.
property.
Yes,
Okay.
I know that.
All right.
and
So
I'm
I
just-
just want to make sure before we really
Yeah.
push that forward, that we can actually do that. And it will-
Yes, well, the schools can actually build, any school can actually, I mean, any property owner, or you're going to allow, any private school could apply to build the housing. The issue is, are they covered by these teacher housing bills, which I don't know. There's kind of there's two separate issues here. One issue is, what can the town require? The town can't require that teachers or district employees live in the housing. The second question is, what can the entity that builds the housing require? And there's, as I said, there's both general employee housing provisions in state law that are quite old, but apply rather generally. And then there's some specific teacher housing provisions. And the intent of these, they're called kind of colloquially teacher housing, but they're district employee housing. And the intent of that legislation is really to have a carve out from the general prohibition against source of income discrimination. If this makes sense. The California Fair Employment and Housing Act covers many categories beyond, what we tend to think of as race, ethnicity, religion. And it particularly covers generally source of income. So you're not supposed to discriminate against people because either in favor of them because they get their income from some particular source, or against them because they get their income from some particular source.
But to clarify, if hypothetically, if Selby Lane School, which is a public school,
Right,
chose to build teacher housing on the Selby Lane, in our section of
Yes.
Selby Lane School, that would count, and they could do it for their own.
yes, for their own staff.
But we as a city couldn't do that. So we couldn't take our own
You-
city property and say, we're going to, on our city, make a teacher facility.
You on yours, there's a provision for, there's a provision for a joint project by a city, a town, and a school district, where you can give preference to both your employees and the district's employees. And I'm not sure it depends where the project is built.
Bill.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about teachers and others. I think I brought up several times during our meetings. We need to make sure that we cover students, okay? We have two colleges right here, and they have students that need housing, and those are the ones oftentimes that are filling our ADUs, and they're low income. The other number that I'm not sure how we would get, and I understand whether or not it would even cover, but assisted care, live-in assisted care, does that count?
It should,
It should.
definitely should.
Rental.
And there are instances in town right now that I think
Depends
if
if
we
it's-
really
it
reached out,
depends if it's
we
a
could
unit or
find
it's
a fair number of those in existence.
Right, I just want to make sure that these guys count.
Yeah, if you have a licensed community care facility, is that what you're talking about?
No,
No,
He's
somebody
talking about an
has-
ADU.
Oh, a single family home?
Yes.
An ADU.
Live in help, yeah.
Well, that person, the live-in person is then is considered to be low income. And if they occupy the ADU, they're considered to be low income.
And if they share a room, if they have a room in the house,
Then,
I think
no.
we have to understand that there's a big difference between what you're planning for, which is the zoning and land use action, and who occupies those spaces and what I think going through the back door of trying to find a way to whether something counts because it has this kind of person or that kind of person is not, I don't think that's what we need to demonstrate here. We need to just demonstrate at the basic that there's enough land zoned at appropriate densities to accommodate all of your RENA allocation and by income category. And so trying to say this kind of person, can we count that kind of person? You're not counting the person, you're counting the units. So that there has to be, and I think that this is the thrust of the AFFH as well, is that there has to be an inclusionary aspect of the housing in the sense that the housing has to be open to anyone, not just somebody that you know, or as we want just these students to join or these, whatever. There has to be something that allows any person in, let's say, in the Bay Area who wants to rent an ADU, regardless of their, regardless of who they are or how they're connected to something within Atherton, that they can do so. The problem with relying on ADUs, as I understand it, there are a number of problems from the state's perspective. One of them is how do you guarantee affordability? And what the thrust of this particular question about, I know that what they're getting at is multifamily housing and not relying completely on ADUs. I know this for a fact, that's what they're getting at. And I think Barb has explained, I think ideally there's a site in the community that could accommodate 100 units of affordable housing, let's say, or however many units you have that you need to provide for of lower income housing, that a nonprofit provider develops it. They do all the outreach and they market it to a broad range of people that can come in community and take advantage of the great opportunities that are here in the community. I think that's where we have to, I'm concerned about getting bogged down in sort of these smaller details at this point because we're trying to convey the entirety of what HCD is after.
Bob?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understood the answer to the question about student or building multifamily housing on a private college campus. Can they, first of all, obviously they can build it. And can not with our, by our dictate, but they can restrict the people that live there to faculty and staff and students.
I believe so, but I actually would like to check that
Okay.
and get back to you.
That's what I thought.
Yeah,
That's what I thought you said.
So I
And-
think that the strongest operative sentence in this paragraph is the focus on our ADU strategy accommodating whether or not it contributes to exclusionary housing
Yes.
and whether it addresses disparities in access to opportunity. And I assume that if we have a robust program with HIP housing, where HIP housing is identifying qualified people and recommending them to, people who own the ADUs, that will help address that issue.
I think that's a good start. I believe that ultimately the decision is a personal decision by the person who who owns the property. And that
Absolutely.
is, that, again, if the reliance is totally, solely or nearly solely on ADUs, I believe you will have significant pushback from the state.
But that's true whether you're renting 1 unit or 5 units. Whoever's renting is making a decision to rent.
This is true, but if you have a project that comes in, that's a multifamily project that's intended to provide housing for lower income households, you have a developer whose sole interest it is to provide that kind of housing. That's what the opportunity needs to be available. That's what this is trying to get at.
Every place that gets built. Every place that gets built, whoever's the manager there and you apply to come in, even if they're, it's for fair housing, right? They do check references. They want to make sure, maybe they're not as interested on ability to pay, so they won't check, bank records, but that probably would. And they're probably going to also check references. Where did you stay last? They ask that type of question everywhere. That's exclusionary. So I don't know where it wouldn't be exclusionary unless it's a county-run operation where they've taken the people like they're doing up, with San Mateo County, taking people out of the encampments and putting them in hotels without questions asked. And even there, they're scrutinizing the people, finding out what their needs are, finding out where they've come from, what the problem is, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't see that anybody is doing just, come one, come all of you are welcome, and we're not even going to look, we're going to put a blind eye.
That's not what I was trying to suggest, actually. I was trying to say that an individual has a different perspective on who they would want to stay in their home than a business whose job it is to find people for housing units. I'm simply responding to what I know the state is going to be pushing on.
Multifamily.
And what, you want council direction on item 9?
Not today, but yes, ultimately this will require at some point your involvement. But the reason this is laying out for you what to expect as we pull together proposals or changes to your existing housing element in red line.
Let's
But the
move-
So
council
one of the-
direction you're looking for.
We're not looking for it today, though.
No, I
Just to
understand,
repeat
but
the
one of the
question.
things we're trying to do today is identify the specific issues we have to come back to and decide on December 15th. I think that's what Bob's pressing for.
Right, exactly. So what?
Yep.
What would be a direction you would expect us to give you for this item? I'm guessing that one of them is we're going to build some 20 unit per acre multifamily. That's,
Yes.
Or the town could identify a town-owned piece of property and develop its own workforce housing program. At sufficient density.
Which would be 20 per acre.
Yes.
and if council direction is we're not going to do that, no multifamily, then that would be the direction we give you. And of course, we won't get a housing element.
No, but I think the issue would be how do we provide the information so that an ADU program doesn't contribute to exclusionary housing that's
And disparities.
focused on disparities in access and
Well,
opportunity.
But Diana's point about you're relying on the largesse of the homeowner that's the only way we're going to get affordable housing. With only ADUs. And they can be
There's no-
totally biased about who they let use that property, as opposed to a multifamily unit where people come in and fill out their application regardless of what color they are, where they work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if they can pay the rent, they can get an apartment.
Yes.
I understand, okay.
But I want to go back to what Bill was saying, because if Arata builds a multifamily unit on his property, he's going to decide whether he's going to rent to people or not. Now, of course, he can't discriminate against them because of their color, but neither can I if somebody wants to apply to rent my ADU. I can't discriminate against them because of their color.
But it's
So
not,
how's that any different?
it's not a guarantee that the unit is rented at an affordable rate.
Great.
It's not a color issue per se, all the time. It's, will that homeowner rent that ADU at an affordable rate versus a developer who comes in, develops workforce housing and has a requirement to rent those units at below market rates.
Correct. And with respect to even, smaller property owners, they're required to follow state law in terms of, you can't favor one applicant over another. You're supposed to take one applicant at the same at first, and if that person meets the bill, then you have to accept them the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth. With a single family homeowner as an individual on their own lot, that those rules do not apply in the same way.
Wait, I can discriminate against somebody who applies to rent an ADU in my backyard?
If
I don't think so.
people, I don't think it's as enforceable as it is for multifamily dwellings.
Federal fair housing laws don't allow anybody, I'm talking about the federal laws now, don't allow anybody to have discriminatory advertising. But the general federal fair housing laws don't apply to units for properties with 4 or fewer units. I'm not sure about the state fair housing laws. We could check though.
Shall we go on to the second page? To number 10. Contributing factors to fair housing issues, and basically we did provide contributing factors in the analysis, or root policy did. But this is really asking us to do is, if anything changed in the analysis from the preceding items that we just discussed, if we want to change the contributing factor, we should do so. And this is why we considered it a low issue.
Yeah, if I could just ask the question on all of these things. So y'all are going to start working on this pretty much tomorrow, I would assume. And are we going to get a chance to see what the contributions are that you're putting in, or we're just going to be working off a spreadsheet on the 15th without knowing what you've done until the final end?
Excuse me, I would defer to staff, but I believe that you will be seeing everything at some point. I'm not sure when, right?
Yeah, I just don't have a schedule of when those edits be available. Root policy started the day I got the letter. I sent it to them and said, get working. So they're not waiting for anything. On the items, we don't specifically need direction on. We're going to start working on that. I've got 2 other staff members in addition to what you see here. But the items that we need direction on, obviously, we're going to need some time to work on that. So yes, we'll get you iterative documents as they're available.
That would be fine, as they are available. Is that what you just said?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd like to give you whatever we have by December 15th for you to take a look at. And then whatever our next check-in, I'll give you that next version. But we may not have every item addressed. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So in this paragraph, they have the sentence, currently the element only includes one contributing factor. Which is that?
I don't know off the top of my head. I can't remember, but there's going to be things like lack of available affordable housing, lack of
Cost of land.
cost of land would be a big one. Yeah.
That's what.
Lot
we're-
size.
This was that,
Yeah,
this was that table in the housing element that had a whole list of factors to include large lot sizes, no multifamily zoning and those things. And when it came to the council, it was modified to address high land value.
So that's the contributing factor there.
The one that we
thank you.
Number 11 is goals and actions. The AFFH included an extensive fair housing action plan, which took all the information from the preceding items and put together a list of things that the town would do. This is also listed as, yes, the council will be involved, because once the AFFH has been revised to reflect these comments above, the town may decide to move things around, make higher priorities of certain items, maybe add some items. So this is something, this will be an action item for you at some time when we complete the analyses. Moving on now to number 12, this is item number 2 in the town's HCD letter. The next 3-4 items are all boilerplate. I think every jurisdiction that I know of them has gotten it. They quantify the element of existing and projected extremely low income households that are paying too much for housing conditions. That's one where we'll have to do a little bit of revision, but not a lot. And housing costs. These are all things that every jurisdiction has gotten a comment about. In some cases, we just point them in the right direction and say, this item is on page thus and such. And for other ones, we will provide a little bit more detail, but they're relatively easy to undertake.
So how are you going to determine hypothetically overpayment of the houses? Was it determined by demand?
We have data on this already. We're using census, the ABAG provided, and the town used an extensive needs assessment. That data is included in the overpayment for housing is in that analysis. The only item that is of concern, and it's minor concern, is number 14, housing conditions. The census data is notoriously poor in terms of determining how many housing units need to be rehabilitated in a community. It's basically how many housing units don't have plumbing, or how many housing units don't have a kitchen. And generally speaking, that's not much of an issue in this particular area. So we'll staff and the consultants will get our heads together and discuss whether we can, if there's any information we can derive from like code enforcement or any other thing, whether there are houses that potentially are so old that they need to be rehabbed, et cetera. That's very easy. I only put it as a medium lift because it requires research.
I'll go on the windshield tour with anybody if they want to go with me.
Okay. I'll go.
I'm good. I know. Well,
We'll take a
somebody will have to
drone.
stay in the car while you climb on the fence, okay? Paul,
I assume a windshield survey isn't a survey of,
It's, I mean,
Of
windshields
a
on
windshield
people's
survey
cars.
would be okay.
no, you know what it means?
Not here.
Can't
Ever
see
gone
them.
on a windshield tour? See, I'm a commercial real estate broker. I get all my clients in the car and we go for a windshield tour of all of Silicon Valley. That one over there, that one over there, that one over there.
Yep.
So that's what a windshield
Yep.
tour is.
Just to drive by.
We'll have,
It's a
we'll have to
drive-by.
use drones in this case.
but this seems to say that we have to provide an estimate of the number of units that need replacement or rehabilitation.
Right.
I mean,
My house, no.
there's obviously subjective judgment as to whether something needs
What are the
rehabilitation.
criteria?
We, in other jurisdictions, they do it by just making a presumption that a fraction of a percentage of every building built before 1950 needs to be torn down. So they'll end up out of a city of like 25,000 units, 3 units need to be torn down. Nobody's going to go out and check and make sure. We just have to have some way of kind of quantifying or understanding if we have the data.
I'd say every one-story building in Lindenwood, it will be torn down at some time.
I have another question.
Sure.
And on the overpayment item, which I think is 13,
That's what I brought.
I don't really understand that. I mean, I definitely overpay.
Yeah, I did too.
It means overpayment, and a severe overpayment is basically the standard is a household should not pay basically more than 30% of their annual gross income on housing costs. And if you pay more than that, then you're overpaying for your housing costs. If you pay more than 50% over for housing costs, then you're considered, you have a severe overpayment or severe cost burden. And so this analysis is basically requiring us to say households, owners versus renters, people via income, lower income, what's the percentage of lower income households that pay too much for housing? It's obviously going to be a lot higher than people who are at the other end of the spectrum. I think most of this data is here. We may need to pull out and make some comments about it, but that's basically what we have to look at.
I don't
Census
know,
data.
they're making
Census
100.
data, but it's been provided by ABAG in its FAT housing needs needs information packet.
So if somebody's making $200,000 and they buy $1 million and $2 million home here, that's overpayment, right? I
Yes,
think most of the houses here have been.
that could well be, but we have to be able to describe it because lower income households
Well, maybe
tend to
200,000.
severely be cost burdened.
So it's gonna
It's
be
not
the
a
census data, a
strategy.
little bit of generalization.
Yeah.
Based on those numbers.
Don't
Okay.
say- don't say things like
So
that.
even
It's
wealthy
not
homes could be
good.
overpaying.
Yes, absolutely.
And can you get the data on people's income and you
Yes,
literally match it?
yes.
Wow.
Easy.
It's in the needs assessment.
Wow,
Already.
that's interesting.
Number 16 or item 16, which is number 4 in the letter. While the site's inventory includes many requirements, it must include the general plan designation. There are some discrepancies cited between sites in the inventory, et cetera. Basically, this is a reconciliation project. It's not really, we didn't consider this to be a high stakes item in and of itself. They just want a bit more detail on the inventory sheet. The next one is realistic capacity. And what this is trying to say, I'll explain this in terms, because it, generally speaking, they're trying to get at your zoning allows for X units per acre, let's say, or X houses per acre, or whatever. Do you generally speaking get exactly that, or do you get less than that? I'll give an example based on multifamily. For example, if you, in inventory that has, let's say it's a 1 acre site and it's 10 acre zoning, and we say we're going to have development on that of 10 units. And the realistic capacity is trying to understand site constraints along with your history of development. What if you have a lot of sites that are all zoned for 10 units to the acre, but none of them have been developed more than 5 units on that site? The realistic capacity in your inventory would be therefore not 10 units, but 5 units. You have to demonstrate that actual development is X number and not higher or lower. It's akin to the conversation that we'll get to later on with ADUs and about how you estimate what your future projection of ADUs will be.
What are our identified sites
I think the schools.
other than the school?
That's it.
That's it.
We haven't identified any other sites.
So down at the bottom of this, that talks about the infrastructure, which is something we've brought up several times. Do we really know whether or not the infrastructure can support putting 20 units here and 20 units there and things like that?
Like the
So,
sewer and stuff.
and so I assume that we're collecting sewer and water and even electricity data, capacity.
Right, there would be an analysis of what the infrastructure requirements would be, and then if there were, it was determined that you could not accommodate your RENA allocation with existing infrastructure, then the state would require you to have a program in place to work with providers to make that infrastructure available.
Yeah, I noticed that once after we identified that, then they said, yeah, you need to do it. And tell us how you're going to pay for it.
Well, any developer though does have to provide for their own development impacts.
Yeah.
Correct.
They would upgrade the sewer lines, they would upgrade the infrastructure, the roadways, signalization, anything like that that was required. The issue, I think, for here is more water.
Right.
And realistic capacity for higher development in the area, and water's always been an issue. Well, sewer is more of the access to and pipelines,
Upgrade
and
to.
size of the main and stuff like that. But developers would be required to pay for that.
Multi-family unit that includes a lot of additional demand on the sewers, you're gonna have to put in a new sewer.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The developer who does that would have to pay for that.
And
But the
hook it
whole
up to the
line
main-
needs to be,
hook it up to the
That
main.
way.
but potentially the whole line would need to be done.
George?
Potentially, the whole line would have to be done.
Yeah, they would have
That's
to pay
right.
their share. Yeah.
Then, okay, so what do we say about the water? When the water company and the state is telling us don't use any water, so we're putting in a bunch of new homes that are gonna use water.
Well, all of the jurisdictions have to provide this information. I don't know specifically off the top of my head what was included in the town's draft, but other jurisdictions have explanations that essentially they've communicated with their providers to discern whether or not they could accommodate that projection of housing needs. And that's one of those factors that will have to be added into. This one is the realistic capacity, which would include some of these concerns, is both something that the council ultimately will have to discuss. And this one is a high level of difficulty simply because we've got to make some major assumptions about things that may or may not impact your inventory as it is.
But right now, 17 only applies to Menlo College.
Yes, exactly. Most jurisdictions do not rely on ADUs for a significant chunk of their housing arena allocation because they have multifamily zoning and they're going to provide it. So the realistic capacity, this one's going to be tricky and will require you to have more discussions about whether or not to include multifamily zones as we go on. So that's one issue. The next one is somewhat of a boilerplate item. This is number 18, small and large sites. This is the first part of it is boilerplate. The second section of it is again asking about what is are the sites that you have identified really suitable for affordable housing? And yes, this is again part of the sort of overall inventory question and it's going to require your input. And this is it's going to take some analysis and discussion on, which is why we considered it a high level of difficulty. Number 19 is suitability of non-vacant sites. This is also a requirement that we have to analyze that sites that already have existing uses on them are not going to be a constraint or a hindrance to further development for housing. To the extent that housing is proposed or, on school sites, et cetera, however that gets dealt with, that we'll have to have a really very deep conversation about where would it really go? How many units would you really get, et cetera, et cetera. They want more documentation. Specifically, the element includes sites identified as a private college, a school site, and a reservoir site, but little analysis was provided to demonstrate whether these existing uses would impede development of these sites within the planning period. That's kind of a important point to make, is that if they can't be developed within the next 8 years, then they cannot be included in the inventory. And this one is also a high level of difficulty, although I failed to make it orange. I am sorry.
So Lisa and Diana Barber, we have in our housing element a letter from Menlo College that says, yes, we've got the land. We just need the money. And so that's a possible, but within the 8 years, we just don't know. So we need more definition around that.
Right.
There's also been in the housing element, Cal Water expressed an interest in some workforce housing, 4 to 5 sites, 4 to 5 dwelling units on their property. If the town were to consider a higher density zoning on that site, whatever that number is, and we got some sort of letter or correspondence from Cal Water in support of that, I'm assuming that would help.
That would help.
Mhm.
Oh, wait,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, they
we
won't,
currently have Cal Water and the college in, that was included in the element that we filed in August. And this says it must include an analysis demonstrating potential for additional development on the non-vacant sites. I assume we did that.
Well, I think some of the questions they have is what's the density at the school? And it's unlimited. We don't have a maximum density. So I think we need to talk about that more. They had concerns about the very low lot coverage standard the town has, the very high setbacks and the height limit. And so some of their questions are, is it really feasible to build teacher housing on these sites, or are these sites already maxed out? And so I do have somebody working on that currently to show feasible locations, how many units, and suggested changes to zoning to accommodate that.
So for Menlo College, can I just really ask you quickly, are you looking at the corner of Alejandra and El Camino, that parking
Yes.
lot? It's about a 1.5 acre
Yep.
site, the entire site.
And then at Menlo School, looking at the front parking lots.
Yes.
And then at Menlo College, I think they identified 2 other potential sites where they would want to rebuild an existing facility and put the housing above.
Okay, good.
And those would be more central to the campus, not right adjacent to single-family homes.
Yeah, well, yeah, the one on the corner of El Camino and Alejandra is not next to homes. I
yeah,
mean, it's down the
typ-
street from homes.
typically where there's just a few sites designated, there's an appendix that provides, for instance, an aerial photo of the site, which you can get off Google Maps. Shows what, shows what the developable area is. Anyway, it, has more information so that it's possible then for HCD to see that the site is really developable.
Do you have to have the sites? We just mentioned a couple for which we potentially could get letters from the people that own the site that say, hey, we want to do it. Can we include sites that we've not yet got official, yes, we want to do it?
You could, but you'd need to have some evidence that the site's likely to be redeveloped. For instance, that the structure on it is deteriorating or vacant or underutilized or something. Yeah.
But-
I mean, although I was just, Diana may have more experience than I do, but I was just on a phone call where, with HCD, where they said, yeah, the letter from the property owner is the best.
But later in the letter, they say that if you zone for 20 or more units per acre, then no analysis is required.
No analysis of if you have a minimum, let's say there's 2 issues here. If you have, if they're zoned for 20 units or more per acre, then it's assumed to be suitable for lower income housing. That's one. Secondly, if you have a minimum density of 20 units an acre, then they'll accept your site capacity calculations. So for instance, if there were a 2 acre site and you said that the minimum density is 20 units an acre, they would accept your analysis that site could accommodate 40 units. But
Okay,
if you
so-
don't have a minimum density, then you have to demonstrate that the 40 units would actually fit on the site.
So-
Also, even though the statute says that they're supposed to accept your minimum density, they'll still want to look at it and see if it passes the smell test, so to speak. The other issue is that although you have to zone it 20 units an acre, they won't accept having 20 units be both the maximum and the minimum density. So in reality, you would have to zone these sites to allow 20 to 25 units an acre.
Well,
Could
Wow.
could we make
Yeah,
a
just,
policy?
I mean, I'm,
So if
Just
we
trying
zone,
to-
if we zone the area at Menlo College, which we've talked about, the O'Brien parking lot for 20 to 25 units an acre,
right,
or the flat area that's at Cal Water for 20 to 25 units an acre, then those don't require any analysis.
the capacity numbers don't, they're supposed to accept the capacity, but they still, if it's a non-vacant site, will look for evidence that the sites can actually be developed.
I think the Cal Water.
Diana,
site's
feel
a
free to
vacant
add.
site.
So
I mean, the water district is vacant. I don't know if that you consider a parking lot to be vacant.
It is not vacant. By state law, it is not vacant. Vacant is dirt.
Well, the Cal Water site
HCD
is
analysis,
dirt.
sorry, it's
The
dirt.
Cal Water site is 100% dirt.
Not actually. There's tanks and pipelines. and
Well, yeah,
facility
but we
between
wouldn't
the
zone where there's the tanks.
But it's
We
one
would zone
parcel.
where there is just dirt.
Right, but I believe it's one parcel or a collection of 3 or 4 little smaller parcels. So we'd have to be careful on how we do that, but yeah, I get you.
Yeah, I mean, the school property is typically one large parcel. And so if you just say 20 units per acre, that's for the entire property. We're not splitting off the parking lot and saying you can have 20 units there, 20 units there. So, yeah, so the
You can do
density may
that.
be much.
You can do that. And if it's more than 10 acres, that big size, if the size of the single lot is more than 10 acres, we'll have to do that.
So
it's
if
more
we
than
were
10
to
acres,
do a
we'll have
policy
to do what?
where we say all private schools are going to be rezoned by right to develop up to, can we do that? Or will they look at each one and contact the school and ask the school, are you going to do it in the next 8 years?
Yeah, you can, I think we say the same thing. If you're proposing to use a site as one that's suitable for lower income housing, they will look at every site.
That was item 20, zoning for lower income households. And again, this one is obviously one that you're going to need to weigh in on, and it has a high level of difficulty because it may change your inventory. The next one is 21, item 21, which is SB 9 sites. The analysis, because SB 9 is new, the state will not accept anything. They won't accept the kind of analysis that you did for ADUs because there aren't any yet. What it says is that in this note, and this is what I've heard elsewhere, to support these assumptions, the analysis must include experience, trends, and market conditions that allow for lot splits and missing middle uses. And it has to identify specific sites where that potentially will happen. This is a pretty high bar. A lot of jurisdictions haven't even gotten to that yet. I know that many jurisdictions aren't including SB 9 sites at all because they can't meet that standard.
And hopefully it will be repealed.
I'm sorry?
We did identify a few sites because we did get a pretty high level of interest. I think it's just justifying the number that we were projecting.
Yeah.
But
They're going to want a list of the specific properties where they expect it to happen.
yeah, we identified the initial, but not every single
Yeah.
90. Yeah.
Yeah, that number may end up coming down based on current activities, but yeah.
Yeah, at the end of the last box, says an add a program to identify sites within 6 months if assumptions are not made. So what are you specifically looking at? We have to put a program together that says, if these ones that we're projecting don't come to fruition, this is. what
Yes.
Steps we're gonna take.
Yes,
Well,
and you have to
Okay,
do that
so-
for ADUs as well.
okay, so when we don't own the land, how can we do that?
You have to count, well, you're going to get an application for a lot split or whatever, and then you're going to track all that information.
Well, we do, but if they decide at the end, they're not gonna do it because let's say trees that can't build the house where they want it
Right.
or put an exit where they want it, then
Right.
and we can't force them.
Nope. But what you do is then you go back and say, we're going to revise our assumptions of how many units, which may change your inventory yet again. And they want to do it I think I said every 2 years. It's the same kind of analysis that you have to do with your ADUs, that will have a recommended program. The state wants a program that you'll look at whether your permitting is being achieved at the level you said it would, and if it is not, then you either need to find other, either adjust the numbers down, and then if you lose units and you're below your RENA allocation, then you have to find new sites.
Let's take ADUs, for example. So somebody is building a house and they're putting in an ADU in the backyard during the construction. The ADU will be the last thing they build, and building a house here in Atherton takes 3+ years. So the ADU is the last thing. So they come year one, they say, where's the ADU? Well, we've got the permit.
But we have to know it's a gross number of units. We look at all units, all ADUs permitted every 2 years. See if we're on track to meet the trends that we thought would happen. If they are not happening, then we change the trends. And then discern whether or not we are falling below the RENA allocation in total. And in which case the no net loss provisions kick in, and you'd either have to rezone or find new sites.
So an active permit counts.
A permit?
An active permit.
Yes.
Can I ask that a different way? When HCD is looking at our numbers that we report every year, to all three of you, I guess, are they looking at numbers of units we permitted and that's what they track? Or are they tracking number of units that have actually completed? Because as Councilmember or Vice Mayor Whitmer indicated, they're
all
several
three.
years behind.
They look at all three.
Look at all
They
titles,
applications,
applications.
permits, and completions.
But they seem to be tracking the trends for your projections right now on permits.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's good. Our trends are up.
The next one, item number 22 is publicly owned sites. This is the PFSD, the Menlo School and Cal Water. We have to include each additional discussion on each to about how they're going to accommodate RENA. This says address current general plan designation, allowable densities, that's current allowable, support for residential capacity assumptions, et cetera. And then make sure that how the town is going to comply with Surplus Land Act items. This one is basically a higher level of development, because usually with publicly owned properties, it's harder to develop in some cases because of other hoops you have to go through. So they want to make sure that you're actually going to be able to develop these, or they would be available for development within the 8-year period.
These sites are not public facilities. They're private. They're privately owned. Cal Water is a private company. And
That's right.
Menlo School, Menlo College.
Then we can fix that by telling them these are not public.
Yeah.
But they'll push back on us anyway.
Well, we can't make them public.
They will potentially apply the same standards, but we'll go back to them and say, sorry, you're wrong.
So one of the items in the recommended action is to allow some by right development, removing the barriers by removing the CUP requirement. Lisa, in our code does the LER, locale environmental review requirement for the multifamily, is that discretionary or more ministerial?
Today for the school sites,
Yes.
it's a conditional use permit.
I thought there was a provision in there that
Oh, if it's low income,
Yeah.
it's staff level.
and it's staff level,
Yeah.
more discretionary.
And I think the other thing that needs to be described better is our master plan process. In
Mhm.
other jurisdictions, that's kind of like a specific plan, and it's a really big deal. Here, it's just them giving us an annual report. And so I think we just need to explain that a little bit better. It's not a barrier at all.
The next one is 23, and it's actually given 2 lines because they're merged in some cases and not in others. The law requires that previously identified non-vacant or vacant sites, these are sites that you have, if you have included them from a prior housing element that have not been built on, then you have to add a program. I don't know if this is the case, that you'd have to rezone the sites, whatever those sites are, to be by right at 20 units to the acre, if 20% of the units in a proposed development would be for affordable housing. So I don't know whether or not you have, I'm assuming, Lisa, you are not reusing sites from prior housing element. Is that accurate? Which one? The schools? So those have to be,
The family
those that would
members?
have to be zoned as, to be able to include them in the inventory, they would have to be by right development, not CUP. 20 units to the acre if and only if the development provides 20% of the units as affordable housing. If it doesn't provide 20% of the units, you don't, it does not have to be by right.
What by right means is that you can't, there's no review under the California Environmental Quality Act allowed. It's basically exempt from CEQA. One other, so besides the 20% affordable, the property has to propose rental housing, can't propose a subdivision. If it proposes a subdivision, then it's subject to CEQA and all the other laws.
But we can still have requirements for setbacks and things like that.
As long as they're
Yes.
objective design
Objective,
standards.
yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay,
Yeah.
all right, fine, thank you.
And there's-
Excuse me?
Don't say anything.
The density bonus provisions kick in as well.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
So that addressed 23 and 24. We're on 25. This is simply a more, again, this is a statement that's got every jurisdiction got about infrastructure that has to demonstrate sufficient existing or planned water, sewer, and other dry utilities, which we can work on reaching out to Cal Water and whomever else to make sure that that is available. For 26, it's simply letting us know that we have to give them the housing element immediately after adoption so that they prioritize affordable housing in their programs. And so we'll ensure immediate delivery of the housing element to providers. That's a pretty easy one.
Well, that is.
The sites inventory is also a pretty simple one in the sense that it is, it's basically a form that has to be filled out that has many columns for various kinds of information. And it's just a reminder to provide that to HCD. Number 28, again, is another high stakes one. This is getting back at the ADU program and the number of units that are being projected. And there are two things here. One is that HCD goes off of its the information that the town provides in the APRs to discern what the number, the beginning number should be. And theirs are, they said 19, an average of 19 ADUs per year. So there's, the town needs to discuss and town council certainly needs to discuss the possibility or the need to reduce the number to something that would be more consistent with what HCD has on its records. Or if it has, if the town has seen an uptick in ADU units in this year, 2022, keep tabs on that because you can make an argument that it should be higher than 19 units. It might not be 35 units, but it might be higher than 19, but we'll need to track that information going on and then put together either a program to address incentives and so forth to make sure that whatever number is arrived at, you can actually hit. But also you'll need a program to monitor the development. And like I indicated about SB9 sites, it has to be every 2 years. And then you adjust your ADU projections every 2 years based on whether or not you're reaching what you projected you would do. Again, this has the unfortunate impact on if you have to reduce the number of units, then you're reducing the number of units in your inventory. And at some point, if you get below your RENA allocation, then you have to either find new sites or rezone.
And Diana, is the target the RENA allocation or is it the RENA allocation with a buffer?
RENA allocation plus a buffer. You can't go below the buffer. The purpose of the buffer is so that you don't run into having to rezone or find new sites.
Is there a minimum required buffer?
No, there's a recommended buffer of between 15 and 30% of your units be in the buffer. But what we're finding is most jurisdictions are looking for Some are around 40% overall because of how the lower income units get distributed. You want to make sure those units are the ones that have a higher buffer, because the minute you lose the units at the lower income, you immediately have to find new sites. That's the point of the buffer.
What's our current buffer?
40%? Did you say 40% of your?
Yes, of total
amount?
units.
What's our current buffer that we have right now? Because we discussed this and we remember we
That's not
went
what
for
we
a lower
did.
number than what was originally.
That's
Yeah, I
what
don't
it's
remember. I
was.
think it's around
465. something like that.
464 or something like
Our
that.
requirement's 348, and I think we went in at 460 something.
464, I think you're right.
Yeah,
More than 30%.
I know, but it
Yeah.
wasn't 40%.
Here's the chart. Thank you.
I feel looking about 30.
Yeah, right now, the housing element shows that you have not, in total, 92 additional, units and a buffer over the 348, but, the town accounted for 96 SB9 units, most of which will go away. So that would almost eliminate your buffer, plus the ADU number. It looks like HCD won't accept that, that number. So, and there's only 10 vacant sites in the town. So getting up to 348 is going to be difficult.
But the buffer is not mandated.
The buffer is not mandated. I think if you don't have a buffer, they'll look much more closely at each site. You know,
Well, a buffer in reporting is one thing in terms of the numbers, but as we're going through our annual reports, if we're not meeting our targets and that sort of thing, it's.
yeah, the only place that they've been requiring cities to kind of redo is mostly on ADUs. If you're not meeting your ADU projection, then they've been requiring, but with the other ones, so long as the sites remain properly zoned, then they're okay. The difficulty cities are running into is that if a site is designated for lower income housing, but it's actually developed primarily for market rate housing, then you lose one of your lower income housing sites. And so the city could probably require, I don't know, somewhere between probably 15 to 20% affordable, but you can't really require 100% affordable unless it's a public site or you adequately subsidize it.
But I mean, there
Yeah.
are two hurdles here. One is getting the certified element. The
Right.
Second is keeping it. And
Yes.
if we do have a very successful, high quality ADU program, even though we have these 20 unit per acre sites that may or may not actually get developed in the period, but our annual reporting
Uh-huh.
does show we're doing low and very low through some of our ADU programs, we can maintain our certification.
Yeah, you might be able to. Yeah, you might exceed. Yeah.
The next segment is a series of items in called zoning for a variety of housing types. Begins on line 29. Number 30, I'm going to read them off, and each one of these have specific requirements. The first one is emergency shelters. Every jurisdiction has to have had on its books allowing for emergency shelters, even though most jurisdictions aren't doing specifically emergency shelters anymore. But the law, the old SB2s required emergency shelters. And they've gone further. Some of the language has been updated in the law that this should clarify shelters are permitted without discretionary action, discuss available sites, acreage, typical parcel sizes, and presence of reuse opportunities, et cetera. And so basically, what this one requires, review the current shelter standards that you have on your books to ensure compliance with state law. If it's not in compliance, add a program to address the nonconformance. Number 31 is housing for employees. This, it requires employees housing for 6 or fewer employees to be treated as a single family structure. It's very similar to group homes. In the same manner as other dwellings of the same type in the same zone. It additionally requires no more than 12 units or 36 beds to be permitted in the same manner, blah, 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 in agricultural zones. This gets at farm worker housing. And this is relatively new, the farm worker part is relatively new. The element must demonstrate compliance with these and include programs. This will look at the code and see what we need to do in terms of these and add a program to allow them.
Are the 6 or fewer for employees, group homes, et cetera, are they already in state law that we have to treat them as single family
Yes.
zone? Okay.
Yes.
So, but we're counting the chief, is that correct?
Pardon me?
We're counting the chief, right? Employee housing.
He's an employee, but I think this is more along the lines of assisted living facilities, 6 or less, childcare, 6
Yes.
or less.
Yeah.
Senior housing, 6 or less. all
Yeah, I
considered
believe
residential.
the state law, I think, applies. It's a little, there's a definition of employee housing where the housing has to be licensed, and I think it's housing for 5 or more employees. But
Right.
if somebody chose to use a single family home for up to 6 employees, they could do that.
Okay.
I will be honest, many of our clients have, put this provision into their zoning code years ago and really have had except in agricultural areas for farm worker housing.
What does this mean for us?
Not,
Add the program and amend the zoning code to specifically reference it
Yeah.
and specifically allow it.
it's a
Because right now we're
relatively,
silent.
it's a relatively simple amendment to the zoning code,
So
which
how
is
could it-
unlikely to have any impact.
I mean, it seems like it would be a no-brainer to do that so that we
Yes.
can comply.
Yeah.
Especially if what you're saying that historically speaking, it's not used very much.
Yeah, and if it's already state law, it's just a matter of adding it into the zoning
Okay,
code.
so.
Because right
that's-
now we're silent on it.
So we'll take a policy direction on that.
But
now.
this isn't yellow.
But
But
It's
you're saying
medium
we have to
because
make
it's a
an
zoning
amendment to
change.
code.
Yeah,
It's already state law, so we'd have.
It's just a compliance thing. It's state law. There isn't really anything other than the ones that are yellow are ones that really require you to kind of mull over what to do about something. The other ones are basically, we're going to comply because we have to. The next one is by right permanent supportive housing. Has to be supportive housing has to be a use by right in zones where multifamily and mixed uses are permitted, including non-residential zones permitting multifamily uses. We have to have a program in here to allow this. There are certain provisions about how many units, the minimum number of units. This is probably also one of those that is not going to be a factor, but to comply with the law, it has to be included. The same with number 33, which is low barrier navigation centers. These also now by law have to be used by right in zones where multifamily and mixed uses are permitted. And this one also would have a program to allow it. Yeah.
So if our multifamily designation is the PFS zone for schools and Bear Gulch and other areas like that, would these be required uses within those particular zones?
Yeah, the way you would deal with this is you would show those as permitted uses in the zones.
Right, okay.
But again, this is state law. Yeah,
and it could be permitted anywhere in the town.
No, it's only within multifamily. and
Multifamily and
mixed-use
mixed
zones.
use.
So currently, we don't have multifamily or mixed use. But the minute we
Do,
create that density on a school site, then yes, we would.
Number 34, this one is about the element must analyze and demonstrate realistic opportunities for multifamily. We talked a little bit about this before and analyze the CUP requirement. If constraints are identified, a program should be included to address and remove or modify these constraints. This one is, we would want to include this in the category of another one that the town council should weigh in on because it gets at the issue of multifamily.
what happened to the mobile homes?
Oh, did I miss over that?
You know, on page 7 of the letter,
It's not.
it,
on the-
it talks.
I must
about
have
mobile
left- how
homes,
did
and
I leave it
don't
out?
think it didn't get,
I didn't copy and paste it over. Sorry,
so how,
I failed.
yeah, so that's a 33.5, right?
33 and a half, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to have multifamily. You have to have mobile homes,
homes?
allow mobile homes.
Where are we gonna do that?
In the parking lot.
That'll solve our problem. You get a lot of mobile homes in that park.
You have to allow for mobile homes and mobile homes and manufactured housing.
Oh, I love it.
So as a housing type. So if somebody wants to come in and put in a manufactured house on their lot in a single family neighborhood, they have to be allowed to do it.
Which could be an ADU.
Could be a nice ADU, have nice ones, and they would all count.
So,
You can require them to be in a permanent foundation. Right.
so on 34 in the, in your response, analyze areas for multifamily housing. Okay, you're gonna do that. Add a program to commit to the density of 20 per acre or more and demonstrate capacity for lower income. Okay, so first off, if it's 20 or more, you don't have to demonstrate the capacity. We already talked about that previously, but
If you were going to call it for affordable housing, yes, you would.
and
And a reuse
secondly,
site.
what happens if we don't want to commute, like in many of these cases, by right? Maybe we don't want to do by right. Maybe we don't want to commit to 20 per acre at certain sites.
These are statutorily required. You must provide for example, low barrier navigation centers, emergency shelters. You must define. It's a state law that. Are you? Multifamily one.
Yeah, I'm on number 34. That's what I said at the beginning.
I see what you're saying. I apologize. Well, the issue is that the conditional use permit, depending upon how the conditional use permit is implemented, could be considered a constraint to development of multifamily housing. And depending upon what you require, I think that the state is going to request that it be by right.
Well, I can request it, but we don't have to agree to it.
By right is actually in the by right zoning's in the statute for in two instances. One is if you reuse a site, if you're using a site as a lower, designating it as suitable for lower income housing, and you designated it in a past housing element. So that covers the school sites. So then they have to be zoned for by right. Also, if you, right now, the zoning doesn't need to be accomplished for either 1 year or 3 years after the due date of January 31st. But if you do any of the rezoning after January 31st of next year, all the lower income sites need to be designated or have the opportunity to use by right zoning. Again, that only applies if there's no subdivision and if 20% of the units are affordable. But those requirements are written clearly into the statute.
Well, if there's a public school, for example, then they say, okay, we're going to build or we rezone it so that they can build housing on top of, let's say, an extension of the school. In many cases, they're in the moderate income area. So we would identify that as moderate, and then it doesn't, some of these things don't apply. Is that correct? Okay.
He said public school site.
Yeah, right now, if these by right requirements only apply to sites that are designated as suitable for lower income housing. So you need to designate sites, I think, that can accommodate 148 units of lower income housing. Some of that will be ADUs, but whatever multifamily sites you designate as suitable for lower income housing will need to allow for this by right approval for basically rental projects with 20% affordable housing.
Okay, I think our lower income.
Place that can apply is the schools.
Pardon?
I said the only place that could apply is on school property.
Well, if those are the only sites that you designate for a multifamily.
Well, maybe Cal Water. So I think we're on item 35. It's about halfway. Let me just see if there's any public comment, because I can't take public comment on every item as we go through. But we're half the way through, so if there's any public comment, now would be the time to provide it. No? Okay. No problem. We can go on.
Okay, the next one, number 35 is ADUs. This is a boilerplate
Uh-oh.
one that every jurisdiction got. Every jurisdiction was told that its ADU ordinance was not in compliance with state law. Every single one. And I asked actually an HCD reviewer who is doing some of this compliance review. We keep being told this, but nobody has received this letter. So we don't know when it's coming.
Interrupt her.
But all we have to do in order to comply with this is add a program that says we'll update the town's ADU to be consistent with state law as needed.
Yeah, and I should mention that the ADU statutes have changed again anyway, effective January 1st. The most important change is that the height limits have increased. Right now, at least under state law, you only have to allow an ADU that's 16 feet high. So they're increasing it to 18 feet in certain cases and to 25 feet for an ADU that's attached to an existing house. Or if the town has a lower height limit than that, it would be the lower height limit. That's the main one. There's a number of other changes about how the ADUs are processed, but that's the most significant, but you'd need to change your ordinance anyway, is really the point. Pardon? Oh, yeah, the other change is it says, basically it was written to say that you can't deny an ADU of up to 800 square feet proposed in the front yard setback.
Wait, in the front yard, did you say?
Yes.
So anybody wants to put an 800 square foot ADU in the middle of their front yard?
Yes.
No.
I thought
Yeah.
there were some caveats around that determination for front yard setback if they couldn't put it somewhere else or no other reasonable spot.
They didn't put that language in.
Okay.
And actually, I've been asked if they have the opportunity to put it in the backyard, do you have to allow it in the front yard? It's not, I would say it's not entirely clear.
And what about screening around it? Can it be required that you would screen it at a minimum?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
The next one, number 36, gets into section 5 of the letter, which is about constraints to housing. This is both governmental and non-governmental. The first one is asking for more detailed analysis of all land use requirements to determine if there are constraints. And this one will be, this is a complicated one because they call out specific things in here, including a 34-foot height restriction, required setbacks and so forth. So that will require more discussion. And this is identified as an item that the council will have to weigh in on, mostly because if constraints are found, the council needs to decide how it wants to address those constraints.
Largely, this has to do with the PFS zone.
Correct.
And if from a planning perspective, if the town were to look at making modifications, the by right, the increased height, and those sorts of things with respect to multifamily within the PFS zone, but also added restrictions that if you wanted to be taller than X, or if you wanted to be closer than Y to a setback or something like that, then you would need to go through a conditional use permit process. But by rights, you had this sort of opportunity.
The difficulty. You want me to talk about? Yeah, okay. So I'm sorry, I feel like all I do at these meetings is give councils bad news. Or, if someone proposes a project with as little as 5% affordable housing, they're eligible for a density bonus. The density bonus, if someone has 15% very low income housing, they can get a density bonus as high as 50%. If it's 100% affordable project, they're entitled to an 80% density bonus. Along with the density bonus, and this actually is more what gives people heartburn rather than the additional units, is you're entitled to what are called concessions, which are supposed to be modifications of development standards that reduce costs, and an unlimited number of waivers of development standards. There's been a recent case called Bankers Hill 150 versus City of San Diego, where the Court of Appeal, without even anyone briefing this particular issue, where the Court of Appeal stated that basically developers are entitled to waivers for the project as designed, unless the city can make one of three difficult findings. One is that there's a specific health and safety impact based on an existing standard that the project's violating. Secondly, that it violates, that whatever they're requesting violates state or federal law. Or thirdly, that there's a historic impact. So developers have been requesting very large variances along with large density bonuses, so that it is a good idea for the city to have some good objective standards. But you need to be aware that a developer with a relatively small percentage of affordable housing, basically the way the courts have been going, would be entitled to ignore those standards, if you want to put it that way.
Height restrictions.
And height restrictions also.
All that.
Yeah.
The next one is number 37, zoning fees and transparency. This is boilerplate. This is essentially the requirement. There's a law that says that a city has to include all of its zoning and development standards and fees on the jurisdiction's website available to the public. And so this is really the ADA program to implement the transparency requirements. This is just following the law. The next,
I gotta ask, did they actually look at the town's website?
yes, they do.
But they didn't see our fees online.
No, I mean, that's what they, like I said, they picked some of the low hanging fruit of things they wanted to talk about in your housing element review letter, and then did all the boilerplate for the rest of them because they didn't have time. Fees and exactions. And while the element provides a cumulative analysis of fees for single family developments, it should also provide this analysis for multifamily. Basically, this is a requirement that is to understand on a generally speaking per unit or per square foot basis, the fees levied on single family versus the fees levied on multifamily. And to determine whether multifamily, the thrust is that multifamily should not be disproportionately impacted by fees, because making it a constraint. So this requires more detailed analysis of what the fee structure is and just adding more verbiage and listing each and every fee. And then the last one, which is related, is the element should analyze a proportion of total fees and the proportion to the development costs of both single family and multifamily housing, i.e. are your development fees 20% of the total development cost for single family, but 50% for multifamily? That is a red flag as far as the state is concerned. Number 40. Local processing and permit procedures. This one is really about going into much more detail about the impacts of your procedures on potential constraints. Design review is required. what is required in design review, talk about what the specific findings are for the CUP, and just kind of basically do a dump of everything that you can say about processing and permitting fees. I said this was a medium level of difficulty simply because it's a significant level of work to put together. But other than that, there isn't going to be anything special out of that. On number 41 is local ordinances, that if there are any locally adopted ordinances, they mean things like inclusionary zoning, if you have it, that directly impacts the cost and supply of residential development. And the short-term rental ordinance should be analyzed for constraints on housing development. Is there an impact on that? And so that again is more words.
We don't have a rental ordinance.
The short-term rental ordinance, it says it.
Of that, where it says there was restrictions on it, which we're going to amend with the.
What has to be talked about.
Well, we have, on our ADU ordinance, there is no restriction on ADU, but on accessory structures, there is. Guest houses, pool houses. that don't qualify.
I think that, I don't think HCD is in favor of short-term rental ordinances. They view them as taking away housing supply, and they've made so it's a little bit, I'm not clear if they think your ordinance is too loose or too,
Like Airbnb stuff.
yeah, they don't, yeah, because they take away housing supplies. So they're generally, you don't have that kind of an ordinance? Oh, so we should, okay, that should be explained.
Yeah, this is yet another one. I think just more words is what they're looking for. I hate to say that, but it's true. 42 is the streamlining provisions, and this is streamlining provisions specifically SB 35 projects. Do you have streamlining requirements for SB 35 projects? And if not, they want to see them or have them in there.
The town is actually exempt from SB 35. It's listed as one of the, yeah. Yeah, because you had enough construction last year. I think we need to check with HCD, but I think that exemption lasts for the first 4 years of the cycle. But we need to check. Yeah.
We will check in on that.
Yay.
Yay. Wow. I'm delighted. The next one is constraints on housing. I'm serious. Constraints on housing for persons with disabilities. This is a required part of the housing element. It's as analysis of zoning development standards and processes for potential constraint for persons with disabilities and specifically for people with developmental disabilities. And so we just need to include a segment with more words that will explain that. And then if there's there's one, what they're getting at is, is there a CUP requirement for group homes for people of 7 or more persons? And specifically, if so, and I can't remember if it's later on down here, but they require, they're asking for jurisdictions to explicitly allow by right group homes for 7 or more persons with disabilities. It's not every group home. It's specifically for disabilities to address the potential constraint on housing for persons with disabilities.
I think
So-
our code is silent on that. I don't remember seeing a.
We can add more words. Number 44 is these housing types should not be excluded from residential zones, et cetera, low density zones, which can constrain the availability of housing. So we just need to make sure that the code, either if it's silent on the issue, then we should explicitly state where they're allowed and that they're allowed by right. The next one is a boilerplate item, availability of financing. This is item 6 in the letter. This is non-governmental constraints. This is, it basically means how hard is it for people to get financing? And this is an easy add. It's not a major issue. Number 46 is, this is also, I want to mention, this is non-governmental constraints. This is not the fault of anyone in the town. It's basically approval time, and there are two things here, approval time and requests for lesser densities. The approval time is, say a developer or an owner is entitled, and what's the time difference between approval and permit? Because there's that gap in there oftentimes indicates, oh, it costs too much money or some other thing. So we want to be able to talk about, is there a big gap between when somebody gets approval for their project and when they actually go apply for a permit, or they don't apply for a permit. It's not something that the state is saying that it's the city's problem. It's just that, is there an identified issue here? And the other one is, are developers proposing projects that are less than the zone density? This also gets at whether, if we had in one jurisdiction, zoning for, I don't know, 30 or 40 units to the acre, but the developer came in with something with like 15 units to the acre because they could make a lot more money out of townhomes than they could out of multifamily. So they want to know these things, and we'll provide more information on that. Special needs, this is number 7. While the element quantifies the town's special needs populations, also must analyze special housing needs. This is a relatively easy one to do. Just talk about, we're going to sort of collect information that already exists and put it together and say, this is what's available to people who are, these are some of the resources available. That's really what this is about, and not a major issue. Number 48 and item 8 in the letter, the element must include analysis of energy conservation opportunities. If there are things that the town already does to encourage green building or anything like that, this is what we'll talk about. The only reason that I put this as a medium is that it might take some more effort to confer with county partners and so forth who might have programs that would be available to community members, but also not a big lift. Okay, next we get on to the big heavy duty stuff. And this is, all of these are really supposed to be yeses in the council column. 49, line 49, C1 following, all the way down. We can talk about them individually if you want, but basically they want better or more committing language instead of saying program language such as discuss or review, develop, and explore should be complemented or replaced with commitments such as adopt, pursue, apply, etc. And the ones that they have identified need firm commitments are below. And I put over in the right-hand column, this is going to affect how you talk about your work plan essentially for the next 8 years, because it would be for every program you would provide concrete timelines for completion. For example, in Q1 of 2024, we're going to conduct a best practices review and on ways to increase rehabilitation. This is an example. In Q4 of 2024, we'll bring the recommendations to the Planning Commission and then the Town Council, and then we'll implement those recommendations. So you're actually committing to doing something. We don't know what that is, but that you are going to do it by this time, and this is what they want to see. They have made it very clear that they want to know when, in fact, some jurisdictions in Southern California said, how many people are you going to outreach to? How many people are going to come to your convening on thus and such? I don't think necessarily we need to go that route, but I think that saying we're going to do this and we're going to implement something by this time. You still have the discretion about what it is, but it's committing to actually doing the work. So the items that they have included in this specific list, and there are others, adoption of an inclusionary zoning ordinance, conservation and
Hold on. Back at the previous one. I don't see how we can put a plan together to increase rehabilitation of aging homes.
This was an example. I was just saying this is what it should look like in terms of, in Q1, we're going to do this best practices review. In Q3, we're going to do blah, blah, blah. And the next year, we're going to do, by this time, we're going to do this. And then the council will adopt recommended changes and will implement by
Because
thus
we
and
walk
such.
through the neighborhoods and just start red tagging homes,
No, the rehab was an example, was not specific to any requirement.
Okay, all right.
Well, this is when we had the multifamily housing concept and then the inclusionary. So I think it was an accidental carryover. But if we put the multifamily back in, an inclusionary fee is, they have to pay a certain amount per square foot if they do not build affordable housing. And then that would go into a fund that the town would use to promote more affordable housing.
That would apply to a developer.
It could also apply to single family.
You,
It's an opt-out provision.
Wait, so
Opt-out provision.
since we have single family authorized, how does it work?
You would need to do a study showing that building single-family homes increases the need for affordable housing. And how does that happen? When a house is built, people need household help, they may need gardeners, they use health services, they go to schools. That's how that's done. A certain proportion of the services they need are provided by lower income people. So you can come up with some kind of a cost per square foot. That's usually how it's done, that developers of single family homes pay. For instance, Napa County, which we're in the unincorporated area, they have a lot of rather large homes, has a housing trust fund, and they charge developers of these large homes a certain amount per square foot. But to do it on single family homes, you need to do that kind of a study.
So good.
To do multifamily, you can set a percentage. Developers kind of expect 15%. If you go much higher than that, I think you should. HCD will ask if that's a constraint on development. So you probably would want eventually to have somebody, an economist, look at, whether the housing could support that.
So
In Atherton, it might be able to support a relatively high percentage.
Essentially like the old redevelopment agencies creates a housing set aside fund that the town could then use.
Yeah.
to Develop affordable housing.
Could there be a fee that's attached to brand new single family homes that if they're not building an ADU or JADU?
Well, you could give people a choice of paying the fee or agreeing that the ADU would be rented to a lower income person.
Yeah, but they're not gonna, but what HCD asks for is that you put it in the deed that it will always be low income. No one's going to do that. No one is gonna do that because
I
first off,
understand.
it'll impact what they're doing at their own home. And secondly, it will impact the sale value if they can even sell it at all.
Yeah, some cities or counties have been doing it with relatively low periods of affordability, like 5 to 10 years, rather than something that would last forever. But I don't disagree with you. Yeah.
So getting back to the programs that they're requesting greater commitment to include the inclusionary one, which sounds like it may not be included, or maybe, who knows? The next one, line 51, the conservation and rehab of existing units. They'll want to know how many units, how is it going to be funded, et cetera, et cetera. 52, the senior program outreach for existing programs. That would need more detail. 53, disabled and developmentally delayed persons. Program should include proactive outreach at a specific timing. The next one, 54, equal housing opportunity, implementation timing again. 55, emergency shelters, transitional supportive housing, and energy conservation. These programs must have clear actions for implementation as well as specific timing. 56, shared housing, that it should be revised to include specific timing, et cetera. 57, housing compliance and monitoring. This should be revised with specific commitments beyond consider for the identified actions. Again, this would be, say, we're going to study this issue. We're going to bring recommendations to council on thus and such quarter, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. The next item, page 58. This is a subsection number 2 of this section C. As noted in the finding, the element does not include a complete site analysis, therefore the adequacy of sites and zoning are not established. So basically, this was a discussion, this is referencing the prior discussions that we've had this evening about ADUs, multifamily housing, et cetera. So once more of this discussion gets going, then we may revise those sections for the programs that require them. Item number 59, the multifamily housing development on schools, and this should be revised to include specific incentives for implementation and what actions will be completed as part of the program. It must commit to the rezones, and so that would essentially implies you have to have a program here that would say, we will rezone these sites by thus and such a date. And they will be definitely making sure that you rezoned by thus and such a date.
But if they're already PFC, there's nothing else we need to do, correct?
Well, I think that you also, you have to zone for, you have to be specifically zoned for 20 units to the acre, et cetera, et cetera.
Do is add the number 20 to 20.
And they will want to know that, they will want to know how much acreage you will be rezoning and what the capacity is, that you're committing to that.
I thought you just said earlier that it had to be the whole, you had to identify the whole parcel, so you identified that whole parcel area, which is like
No.
20 acres, and then you say, and we're gonna rezone it as 20 to 25.
That's, no, I didn't say that. What I'd say is you'd be required to actually just either somehow identify what portion of the site would be developed with housing, not the entire site. Any site over 10 acres has to have a program associated with it that would identify explicitly how that would take place, how the development would take place.
Would we have to break up that parcel?
It could be done probably in a variety of ways, but I don't think it's not the specific requirement of the state. It's just that you have to demonstrate what part of the site you're actually talking about and what the capacity is.
All right, thanks.
Although preferable, the zoning does not have to follow property lines.
Okay, so, and have we had discussions, sorry. Have we had discussions, Lisa, with the college for other locations other than the corner lot, the parking lot? Because that's the only.
Yeah, the main one was that corner lot, and then they identified 2 other
They
locations.
did,
Yeah.
okay, all right.
Some of the other changes we would have to do are the development standards associated with those zoning changes. So that would be part of that timing issue. Right, right.
Could we have different height requirements on different portions of the parcel?
The next one is number 60. It's not applicable at this time. This is basically a standard statement that says if you can't meet your RENA with your inventory, you have to have a program to accommodate the allocation. We don't necessarily need to deal with this right now because we're nowhere near finishing discussion the inventory. Number 61, replacement housing requirements. This is basically there needs to be a program to ensure replacement of lower income utes when they're demolished or when substantial rehabilitation permanently displaces tenants. This is something in the law. And I'm not familiar with the particular numbers, but I believe that 65915 is a reference to no net loss provisions. Is that correct?
So this provision applies to any site that's listed in the housing element, any specific site. There's also, let's see, in terms of the housing element, it applies to any site that's listed in the housing element. And for instance, if for some reason you listed an SB9 site and somebody was going to actually, you're not supposed to do this as part of SB9. So that's not a good example. I was going to say if they were demolishing a existing ADU and building something else, then they might have to pay, they might have to relocate the tenant. So,
Yeah.
but there's another law, the Housing Crisis Act of 2019. Are you an affected city? You don't know?
I don't think so.
I should check. There's a few small cities that aren't. But anyway, for most of the cities in the Bay Area, if somebody comes in and wants to, let's say that there's a small house and a small ADU on the site and they're occupied by tenants who happen to be low income, then the owner, the tenants are entitled to state relocation benefits. They're also entitled to a right of first refusal to return to the existing home. So anyway, it's
It's developed.
after it's developed, yeah.
At the then current rent or
No.
value?
At a lower income, at a rent
Yeah.
affordable to a low income person, which might be lower than they were paying now. Yeah,
So,
it tends to affect larger developments, but they extended it to single family homes
Oh my
a couple years ago.
so if there
Anyway.
was an area, let's say we go down this path and, then it's determined that, like in one of our original discussions, we were gonna rezone, 3 or 4 pieces of property. But, they couldn't build a whole lot of things on that property. You would have to buy, negotiate and buy all pieces of property.
Right.
When the guy gets ready to build something, then he's responsible for relocating anybody that was living there and making sure that their rent wasn't any higher than it was before.
Anybody who's living there who's lower income.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this might sound odd, but I'm working on a project now in a wealthy community where it's a little hard to believe this is penciling out, but they're proposing to demolish 22 duplexes that rent at $6,000 a month and replace them with 40 units. And even the developer agrees there's 3 lower income tenants in that property.
Wow.
Paying $6,000 a month.
Yeah, we think that they're supported by family members, but doesn't matter. The tenants themselves are lower income.
We are close to being at the end. I can't believe it. The next is section 3 under the programs. This is line 62. The element must include a program with specific actions and timelines to assist in the development of housing for extremely low income households. This is basically a boilerplate that every jurisdiction is getting. The program could commit the town to adopting priority processing, granting fee waivers or deferrals or whatever for extremely low income developments. This is.
In town.
Yes. And the second one, which is related, it must also include a program to assist the development of housing for all special needs households, such as elderly, homeless, farm workers, persons with disabilities, female-headed households. There could be proactive outreach, and I know that there have been actually assistance to nonprofit service providers, prioritizing funding that you do have for developments that may include housing for people with special needs. So these are both programs that have to be added. And then we'll have a discussion at some point about what those programs could look like.
But they don't have to include everything on that list, right? What HCD is saying. HCD is saying the town could choose just to do priority processing for these sorts of developments, but it doesn't have to do priority processing, fee waivers, and this and that. And
It has to include something for households, for both extremely low income households as well as special needs groups.
We should just do it for farm workers.
Number 4 in this
Farm and
line is just a placeholder, line 64. Once we've made analysis of potential governmental and non-governmental constraints, based on that analysis, we may come up with new programs. My gosh, we're on the last page. Number 65, line 65, this is item number 5 in the program section. The element must include actions that promote AFFH opportunities as stated in the findings. So we're going to work with root policy on this because there are, you do have a fair housing action plan already. We'll see if there's any specific additional information that we need to provide, but essentially every jurisdiction that got in 21 elements got a fair housing action plan with some of these items. So we'll make sure that we get in sync with root policy on them.
Well, we could go ahead and have tighter connections with some of the schools when we know what inventory we have. The two major schools in this area, you know, they have people looking for housing, so and they don't always go through hip housing. They don't even know about it.
You're talking Menlo College.
Menlo College,
You're talking-
yes, and also Stanford would want to know.
Also, the high school said that they wanted to participate in our program. They already told us that.
Yeah.
School.
Okay.
Or Menlo Atherton. Menlo
MA, the
Atherton,
public
yeah,
school.
Right, okay.
But she was saying that we can't, there's specific rules about where you can do that if you're gonna have it targeted toward teachers or specific income categories. So we gotta
I mean,
navigate that.
that whole catch-22 just kind
Yeah,
of
it's a hard
upsets me.
thing
I
to
mean,
navigate.
Line 66 is item 6 under this section C, which is this particular program. The new construction of affordable accessory dwelling units, the program must clarify the actions that will be implemented to incentivize ADUs beyond consider. Essentially, this will require making specific commitments to incentivize, monitor. We talked about this before, a monitoring program is included above. And some of the things that the town may want to consider are things like fee reductions and things like that. That's also up for discussion, sort of as part of the overall ADU issue.
Yeah, so the way I read this, if I, just one quick comment, is that it seems like they say, well, we did an analysis, said, would you consider? And it reads to me that they want to have commitment.
Yes,
And until you have your plans checked, you can't commit because, you know, we have trees all over the place. We have TPZ requirements. You can't build on top of roots and stuff like that. And so suddenly the house may have to, you know, the ADU might have to be right next to the main structure and people don't want that. So they'll say, forget it, you know? And
Well,
so
this was-
no one's going to give an overall commitment.
No, they're talking
This
about
is
the town.
referencing the programs that we
this is the
identified.
program to incentivize. The commitment is, what are the incentives are you committing to? Even if you don't know them, you can say, we're going to conduct a best practice review, like I said, in Q1 of blah, blah, blah. In Q3, we'll bring recommendations to the planning commission and then town council. Town council will
right.
adopt recommended actions and
I
so
didn't
forth.
realize we were talking. When I read it, seemed like it was more.
I think we put in the planning fee waiver
Yes, so
as an incentive, and so we need a discrete timeline for that.
Got it.
So
Thank you.
fees, there's also, we were talking about in allowing prefabs and fast track designs and
Yep.
all of that would be considered part of this, right?
We
Yeah.
need timeline.
Just a
Discrete.
time.
Just have to give a commitment on the timeline.
And working with the state to reduce the property tax impact.
Okay, line number 67, we're in the home stretch here. These are basically, well, the first one is item D, which is, this is called quantified objectives, and it's basically, this is estimating the number of units that we actually will think will be built, because a lot of jurisdictions have arena allocation of, say, 1,000 units, and we've planned for it, but based on what we know and what our projections for things like ADUs and pipeline projects and all these other things, of those 1,000 units of the arena allocation, we think that over the 8 years, we're going to see development of 750 of them. The number of the quantified objectives does not have to meet the RENA allocation. Great if you can, but mostly because of income issues like developing housing for lower income, very difficult to manifest that. Typically, the number is lower, so you must identify how many units you think will be constructed of ADU, single family, multifamily, if you think, based on what you know. How many units that you'll conserve, those are units at risk of conversion, or other units that you think you need to rehab or assist with that. What did I miss? Conservation, rehabilitation, and new construction. Those are the three. So basically it's a table that says quantified objectives. This is what we think will actually happen.
So if you suggest a number that's less than what your allocation is, they're going to reject your,
No, they won't. It's specifically written into the law that says the number does not have to be the same as the RENA allocation.
Why are they focused on 5 years rather than 8 years?
5 years, the 5-year time frame. Well, we always do it in the eight-year time frame, but I don't know why. I don't know why that says 5-year because it's always 8 years. I'll have to look that and see what they're
Because we
referring
get our
to.
4 years free.
I don't know about that.
4 years, right?
Number,
The housing elements used to be revised every 5 years rather than every 8, and so they may not have picked it up and made it consistent.
Perfect, perfection.
they pick up everything but that.
What the heck?
Okay.
back in the day.
Hey, what are we paying our taxes for?
The last, next to last one, the penultimate is 68. This is item E. While the element includes a general summary of public participation process, the element should also demonstrate diligent efforts or to involve all economic segments of the community, blah, blah, blah. So basically, this means more words that explain all the work that Let's Talk Housing did to reach all economic segments of the county and any efforts that the town also took. And they also want to know whether or not translation services were provided or offered. This is just a lot of words that have to be written on that. And last but not least, it actually is in my book, the least, the element must describe how consistency was achieved between the housing element and other elements of the general plan. This is basically a blurb that says, during the process of updating our housing element, we identified areas that we know we're going to have to update, and let the land use element. We don't know what those are just yet because we're not there in terms of things like the inventory and zoning that needs to be changed. And then you also make a statement as to how you're going to, look at the housing element over time. And if things change in the housing element, what other things will you need to do just to make sure that they're all internally consistent. And that is it for me. Hey, I don't know about anybody else.
Can I ask a random question? Which,
Yeah.
is there any way a city can annex property that we don't currently own in order to achieve some of the goals when you're in a city like ours where financially none of this is going to make sense? We're not going to achieve this realistically. So can we annex other property we don't currently own? Is there any venue that they've discussed to do that? Yes, you can annex property. I mean, I know of one city that in the last cycle annexed property in order to get some multifamily zoning. But that was after their housing element had actually previously been approved, but HCD was hassling them about, I think they had promised in their housing element to annex the site. What's been happening now, though, is that if you want to annex a site that looks really good, San Mateo County may want to transfer the RETA, whatever they had, the unincorporated county may want to then, let's say that the county already designated the site for 100 units. And Atherton says, hey, that would be a great site to annex. It's right next. County will insist that you increase your RETA by 100 units because they'll say we're losing that site. I mean, it's possible there's a site the county hasn't designated that you might find, and
wouldn't face that, but that's real, what's been happening consistently.
So in order to annex, let's just go down this for a minute, because I honestly think this is a pretty impossible task, given where we live, and, you know, we'll make our best effort, but it's hard. If we were to annex something, let's go down that for a minute. Does it have to be adjacent to our property, or could we go and pick a zone?
No,
It's
it
gotta
has to be
contiguous.
adjacent. It has to be adjacent. In past years, they allowed like roads to, if you look at the boundaries of the city of San Diego, there's like a road that goes down and they pick up some other property. LAFCOs won't permit that anymore.
Now, what about our Selby Lane School, of which we have, I don't know, something like some portion of it is an Atherton, another portion of it is not. Well, but the address is listed as Atherton. If we were to develop that site, would it have to physically be sitting on the dotted line that's on
Yes.
Atherton?
Yeah,
That wouldn't be gray enough to be considered annexed.
right. Yeah. Sometimes I'm aware of another site that's divided between two cities and they basically, you know, agreed to share. They did some kind of a sharing about where the project would be.
Why'd you shake your head about annex?
Ona, did you want to say something?
Oh, yes, thank you. I just wanted to add a comment about annexation. First of all, if we're going to be annexing land into the town, it would have to, in almost all circumstances, be an approval with either the county or an adjacent city. We have to go through the LAFCO process, Local Agency Formation Commission, which we have to basically demonstrate that we are more capable of providing resources. And then this is kind of the bigger issue, is entering into a tax sharing agreement with the agency for which we're going to be assuming the additional land. Because if it's the county as an example, they will be losing property taxes that they would otherwise be collecting. So there's either, you know, agreements that go on for perpetuity or for 50 years where they still want the benefit of getting the taxes from the property that's annexed. So I just wanted you to be aware of that.
Well, if it's a school, there's no taxes.
We've talked about doing an annexation in the past and we ran down all the numbers and it just seemed like it was not something that Atherton wanted to take responsibility for. Both that, all the reasons Mona just said, tax liability, support, security, police, all of the other infrastructures that we would have to provide. And Mayor, there's a public comment.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Tom Georgie with Stephanie Sargent. Question about 23 Oakwood. About 15 feet of that property is actually in Redwood City. Would that affect what he could do there at 23 Oakwood?
Or it's owned by him.
I mean, well, the answer is yes.
Short, yes, but
Yeah, that's the short answer. I don't know, with such a small piece, you know, there might be Redwood City might agree to Atherton.
Right.
Yeah.
in terms of annexation, though, I think Councilmember Hawkins Manvelian and Vice Mayor Widmer were mentioning the Adelante Selby School. And the rear section of that parcel is actually an unincorporated county, and the border goes through a building, I believe, on their lot in terms of our map, what our map shows anyway. So I would think that LAFCO would be supportive of moving that section of the parcel into the town if we asked the school district, who would have to be the applicant to LAFCO to assist us with that.
Yeah.
So it's something we could look at down the line, but it would take a
Yeah.
while.
I think it's something that makes sense to look at. It's not going to be relevant for this housing element, but it definitely makes sense to look at.
I just wanted to add that the town of, or the city of Belmont is going through an annexation process with Harbor Industrial Area, which is where the county housing offices and a bunch of other things are. And they are in discussions, but they've only been able to add one parcel so far because They actually had a project on it that the county was willing to work with. And so it was in the process and HCD accepted that, but all these other ones, even though the intention is to annex all these, like, I don't know, there's 27 acres or something into the city. HCD needs it to be further along in the process.
Okay, Greg, did you want to make a public comment?
One side of the street and somebody else
Well, on any street, that's an annexation issue. So you have to have the owners of the property that wish to be annexed appeal to the town to engage in the annexation effort. And if the town agrees to do that, it has to go to LAFCO. I mean, we've had people in some areas ask to be annexed or at least express interest in exploring it, but it never really came to fruition in the last several years.
Well, so the town of Atherton does not have a sphere of influence that extends beyond its borders. Many cities do. And so in some jurisdictions, right, the sphere of influence is with this county unincorporated area, and at any time the annexation occurs, then it logically goes there. So another step would be to confirm with the jurisdiction that does have that property in their sphere of influence that they do not wish to receive it, and they would concede that it could go to Atherton.
LAFCO encourages those pockets to be categorized with specific jurisdictions. Local Agency Formation Commission under the Cortez Knox. Hertzberg Cortez Knox.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Public
made up of usually two supervisors and,
Jurisdictional
yeah, and
elected.
local representatives. Yeah.
The city select committee appoints most of the people to LAFCO in San Mateo County.
Can I ask
Diana?
another question? What seems to come up here a lot is that they're really looking for projects that are ready to go, where we can say, we have a builder, we have a this, we have a that. And I don't see anything in what we have right now that is actually have a builder that's really ready to go with plans. Will they accept it as it is, or are we going to have to include the only one, which is the one I see people here about? That's the only one that has a developer that's actually willing to develop right now. So can we submit without one that's ready to go?
Well, I think you're going to be required to do so. I mean, there's no other way you can get to the 348 units. The standard is that there's substantial evidence it'll be developed in the next 8 years. So then they look a lot toward owner interest and other factors that make the project seem feasible. Yeah.
So we've made a lot of comments, I guess, as you went through this and provided you some input. We all took notes on that. Is that correct? So that we don't have to add them back in on the 15th.
Mayor DeGolia, we have another member of the public online who wishes to speak.
Okay, sure. Hi, Ann. Would you like to give a public comment?
Yeah, yes, I have one specific question and one general comment. The specific question is, and I don't know the answer to this precisely, but it's my understanding that I'm in Lindenwood and just north of Marsh Road, isn't some of that unincorporated, or is that all Redwood City? Because that would seem like a very wonderful idea, something to annex, because those houses and lots are much smaller and there are probably people there who are considered lower income. Has that been looked at all, or is that actually Redwood City?
That's an unincorporated area of the county beyond our portion of Marsh Road.
Right, Atherton has about half the property between Fair Oaks and Middlefield on the north side, and the other portion toward Fair Oaks is county.
So I just want to know if the council has actively looked at that, because that just seems like an obvious move to me. I mean, it's already, we have some friends who live on Holbrook on the Atherton end of Holbrook, and It seems like a sort of a common community over there between Fair Oaks and Middlefield. So I can't imagine that the people who live there would be upset if they became part of Atherton.
Actually, some of them have expressed wanting to leave the town of Atherton. Largely, the land use and planning restrictions are far looser within the county area.
Yeah, they could build a larger home in the county. That's
Yeah.
correct.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you. As long as you guys are thinking about that, that's all I wanted to ascertain. The second thing, which is a general comment, and I hesitate to make it because the last time I made it at one of these housing element things, I got jumped all over by other members of the public, but I'm going to say it anyway. It seems pretty darn clear to me, and it was actually pretty clear to me in my own mind, even before we got comments, but now with the comments, they are not going to accept the ADU only strategy. We have to go beyond that. And I personally think we're going to have to go beyond the things we've already thought about, like the water district and the schools. I just don't see how we're going to get this through and get it passed without actually looking at serious multifamily housing. So I just want to encourage the council. I realize that nobody wants to do that. I don't really want to do it. And all of these laws, and they're just so crazy. I mean, they make no sense, but they are the law. We need to comply with the law so we don't get hit with some punitive damages or whatever they call them, fines. So I just think we have to be realistic, and I think we need to look at our fringes, and we need to get some multifamily housing, and I'll just stop there.
Is this the appropriate venue to talk about things like the courtyard and the property at Gilroy in this venue, or is this not the time to talk about those?
It's not the time. We were just going over what they were going to work on.
So perhaps in answer to Vice Mayor Whitmer's earlier question about notes and next steps, Lisa, can you articulate what the plan is for the 15th?
Well, we'll be working on the response to all the comments that we reviewed, and as many as that we can provide you by the 15th, we'll do that. We'll give you a track change document. And I believe we're also going to, for the ease of HCD to see what we've done, is to list the page and where we've responded to each comment on that table. And then we'll have some recommendations on some new programs for you to consider.
And also at that point, we should have the background count from the microfiche of the building permits and have a better handle on that. We'll close the ADU survey that's online and get those statistics and numbers to you as well. And then we also have the current permitted and completed ADU list from dwelling unit list from 2018 forward that will also have part of that meeting for discussion. So. All right.
I'm really looking forward to your inventory of current ADUs.
So am I.
Okay, and permits.
Yeah,
Got a
right.
person here.
And usage.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Sargent. So Diana had mentioned that Oakwood was the only property left, I guess. What happened to Atherton Avenue? There was a builder interested in building on that. So I think there's other properties that, other than 23 Oakwood. And 23 Oakwood, there's not plans that we've ever seen. You guys have never seen plans. There's no. So
23
development interest.
23 Oakwood is the only property that we're aware of where a homeowner is interested in
Not a developer,
developing
though.
townhouses.
And we have seen
But what about
pictures of-
170 Atherton?
That fell off, as far as I know.
So the Aradas know that they're responsible for all the sewers and lights
or-
and things like Selby,
yeah.
like putting a traffic light on El Camino at Selby.
We haven't discussed the infrastructure impacts, but it
Just,
may be,
I just want,
that
I know we have to
it-
say
it-
something.
it may
in
be if
public
there isn't
comment if we
sufficient
want.
infrastructure that they'll be responsible for.
He would be responsible,
upgrading
or
the
the
sewer.
Aradas would be responsible for that.
Yeah.
I just want to know he knows that because his questions when he calls in are like, he doesn't seem to really understand what's going on.
Well, at this time, it's not in our current plan.
Well, Diana had brought it up, so.
Okay, but it's not in our current plan that we submitted, which I know that you guys looked at.
I know Diana had brought it up, so I wanted
Yeah,
to
I was-
mention about 170 Atherton. Because I know there's builders that wanted to build there.
They've fallen out, so they're not at the table anymore.
Well, I
Bill-
didn't, know the public wasn't informed of that, so.
Well, we haven't got
Thank
to
you.
talk about specific properties, and I only brought up that one.
You
because
brought up 20.
I did bring it up, and I brought it up in the context that in this paperwork, they're constantly talking about projects that are ready and projects that have to be ready within a set amount of time, and we have to report back. So I was stating the fact that the only one of all the ones, and there are many more, they're not just the two that we're talking about right now. There are other ones like the Courtyard, the Gilroy House, there's other ones on the table. But the one that has an actual plan, and at least I've seen drawings, he's got drawings and there's a
Oh,
plan.
I've
and a
heard there
committed
was no
person.
drawings that,
Okay.
like, when I asked the mayor and vice mayor, they had not ever seen drawings of it.
There's been nothing submitted to the town formally.
There's nothing, yeah, nothing submitted, and the mayor and vice mayor both told me they'd never seen a plan.
They came with a conceptual, what it would look like from the front. They didn't have architectural drawings. No, they did not have architectural drawings. To my knowledge, they don't have architectural drawings. They haven't brought in an architect. They haven't done anything other than talk.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's what my point. Thank you.
Is
Motion
that
to
it?
adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Yes, thank you. Welcome. For tolerating all this. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.